Hey, Brian and Melissa, I'm happy to call the meeting to order as we wait. I know we're still waiting for Tabidi to hop on, potentially, and serve as vice chair, but I'm happy to help call.
Thanks.
Excellent. And do you want me to start?
That's
Okay,
fine.
good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining our meeting with the Youth Development Council on June 9th from 8 to 12 p.m. today. And my name is Parasa Chanrami. I'm one of the council members filling in, and I'd love to start by calling the meeting to order.
Thank you, Parasa. This is Melissa Gallardo from YDD, the council administrator. I'll just remind everyone that this is a public meeting, that we are recording the meeting. It will be posted later on the YDD YDC YouTube channel. We will have a section of our meeting at the end. I think I'm checking our agenda. It's at 11:45 for public comment. Prior to that, if there are any guests from the public who want to participate in the breakout rooms that we're having and everything, that's great, but we ask you to reserve your public comment till the end. You can message me in the chat function of our virtual meeting here and let me know your name and your entity that you're representing and your contact information, and if you'd like to make a public comment. Now, I'm not used to doing this part of the meeting either, but I'm looking back to see if there's anything I'm missing. Brian, can you think of anything? Oh, sorry, I did fine. Just reminders to please say your name when you begin speaking. It's still a little challenging sometimes with this many folks in the virtual room to see who's talking about what. And I think that's it. Unless there's anything else that you can think of, I'll go ahead and take roll. All right. Zan Ojero.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Zan. Eric Cardella.
Present.
Parasa Chanrami.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Janine Hartley.
Present.
Celeste Jansen. Robin Johnson, we know is not able to make it. Andy Leonard. Tabidi Lewis. Adrian Livingston.
Here.
Thanks, Adrian. Erica McAlpin. Christina McMahon.
Here.
Maricela Ortega Guzman. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers. Molly. Okay, Diana Rojas.
Here.
Andy Santana May. Karen Spencer. Liz
I'm
Thorne.
here.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Karen.
Sorry, just a little slow and sleepy. I will wake up, I promise.
Let's see. Liz Thorne. Let me know if she's not able to attend. Koi Vu. Kiwi Wilson. Oh, Koi just chimed in. Awesome. Into the meeting. Kiwi Wilson. Okay, that's everyone. Let me do a tally and I'll let you know shortly who is here. Oh, I don't. That's for the quorum. I'm going to go ahead and note. Call the ex officio officers. Sam Coe.
Sam is here.
Thanks, Sam. Nakia Daniels.
This is Rafi Miller serving as a proxy for Nakia for today.
Hi, Rafi. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. All right, that's the end of roll. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
I know that Jeff is going to pop in at some point, and Celeste too. Celeste's got to get her son off to school, and I imagine you all are balancing lots of things. And I thought I did see Molly, or I saw her name at some point. So I don't know if I didn't hear Molly's voice, but I thought I saw her at one point. So we'll figure it out. Good to see you all. I know it's, Robin's had a personal situation come up that's going to definitely take her attention away from family situation. So we'll just kind of keep her, hold her in our thoughts as she deals with family situation. And everybody, we're here. We're going to start off though. Let me see. I'm going to go. I have a detailed agenda that I can refer to. So I guess one of the things that I wanted to just remind folks of is we're starting early. We're starting at 8 because we found value in this opportunity to kind of connect and review the agenda. It is the official start of the meeting. Because if we tried to do this sort of check-in from 8 to 9 and then another, it would be 2 meetings if we decided to somehow separate this sort of check-in opportunity and then the other sort of agenda item. So we've made it 1, and so we do the roll and we start things. If we tried to have a separate meeting at 9, we'd have to do the roll and do a bunch of things over again. So it just felt like we should officially start at 8. I know that we will have some folks joining us later, just given, school schedules and other professional schedules. But just as a reminder, our official start is 8. We're going to spend some time in breakout rooms. We also typically start with our land acknowledgement. And I just wanted to let the whole council know I was able to talk to the executive committee about this a couple of weeks ago. We've paused on the land acknowledgement because we've gotten some feedback through our regular conversations in government to government meetings with the tribes that there's some concern that land acknowledgements are just kind of performative, and folks are just sort of saying things that are actually pretty traumatic to have to rehear over and over about genocide and stolen land and failed policies. So the Legislative Committee on Indian Services, LCIS, has asked agencies to pause on land acknowledgements, and they are going to come out with some guidance and recommendations, perhaps a new version of land acknowledgements. We'll see. I think they have a meeting coming up in July. After our executive committee did reach out directly to the executive director of the Legislative Committee on Indian Services, his name is Patrick Flanagan, kind of shared that we will also pause, and saying to him, hey, it'd be interesting for us to just talk a bit about kind of, well, take your guidance, but also share that, there's some specific things that as an agency we're committed to doing. And so for us, it's not just words, and it's also not to say that we've got it figured out, right? There's work to do. But as I think you all will recall, our strategic plan has a specific strategy around honoring and understanding tribal sovereignty. So we've been pushing forward on different initiatives as an agency around. We included a score multiplier in our request for applications that meant that tribes who applied for YDD grants were given their applications were given a kind of a boost, for lack of a better word. And as a result of that, we awarded 8 grants to 3 different federally recognized tribes in the last round. So that's one thing that we're excited about, and we'll continue to want to encourage and promote our grant making to tribes. Through our JCP work, juvenile crime prevention work, we receive plans from tribes, and also there are funds that we pass along to tribes, which we're continue to be excited about, and they work, I think, really effectively and closely with counties, and particularly the Native American communities around crime prevention tribal council, youth councils at the tribal level. So some exciting work happening there. And we also, in the last RFA, in the agreements that we have with tribes, we've removed language that asks tribes to waive their sovereign immunity. And that was a specific request that tribes had made for probably a year or two. And so we worked with DOJ and OD, the Oregon Department of Education, and just various entities to kind of pull that language out of our grant agreement. So those are just some of the things that are happening. Again, more work to do, things that we will get wrong, I'm sure, but just know that we're engaged in that work, and we'll be in touch at our September meeting about what comes of the recommendations from the Legislative Committee on Indian Services. And I'll say quickly too, there's like mixed perspective. There are some tribes who are concerned about agencies and others using land acknowledgements and feel like they're not that useful. And then there are other tribes who find them to be useful and important. So as with any issue, you might imagine there's kind of different perspectives. There's not just one view on that. So I just wanted to provide that context. I don't know if there are any questions or comments from council members on that.
Brian, this is Parasa. I just wanted to make a brief comment and appreciate the responsiveness, especially from the YDED and the YDC to guidance coming from the Legislative Commission on Indian Affairs. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about what comes out of their July meeting. And outside of the council, I'm also interested in just getting more training as well. And I think that could be really valuable. So thank you again for the update on that.
You're welcome. Thanks, Parsa. There's some fantastic information, and YDD staff, Melissa, et cetera, you'll have to help me with this, but I think it's through the Oregon Department of Education, but there's some really good resources around tribal, I think I'm going to butcher this, but maybe it's like increasing tribal understanding. And there is sort of curriculum, I think, that they've laid out that is relevant for younger students. But if I'm not mistaken, that material's also been made available to state employees, and it may be more broadly, it may just be available generally. I know that through some state systems like our iLearn and Workday, it's now called Workday, but there's some systems where we can enroll in specific courses to gain more information and knowledge around tribal understanding. Oh, thank you. 9 essential understandings. Thanks, Parsa. So that link that you just put in, I would encourage folks to check out. And if I'm not mistaken, there's not only that sort of basic tribal essential understandings, but I believe there's also training that goes along, or videos and resources that go along with that. Any other comments or questions, Melissa?
Karen has her hand up. Thanks, Karen.
Oh, Karen, please.
Well, the link probably solved half of what I was going to say. So thank you so much. And as someone who appreciated when the land acknowledgements started and having that reminder, I hope that they do construct a new one. What I felt for a while is that it was so past looking. I would love to see something that is more focused on the current state of the tribes as well. So it's just one layperson's opinion.
Thank you, Karen. And I think you said it well, and I think as an agency, perhaps the opportunity for us, and maybe this is work that can happen at the Equity and Disparity Committee, is to maybe develop something of our own that both reflects on that past and also brings to the fore the commitments, actions, and work, and just sort of that present day relevance. So we'll see if we'll get their guidance, and I think there will probably be an assignment for us to do some of our own work. All right, I'm going to keep moving us forward. Thanks, Parsa. Thanks, Karen. If other folks have ideas or just comments, feel free to throw them in the chat. I want to quickly run through our agenda, and then we'll break out into these breakout rooms. One of the things you could do in a breakout room is also ask more questions of like, what is this agenda item about? Or I have some questions about, that agenda. The staff will be in each of the of those breakout sessions, so you'll have a chance to probe and ask questions, and you also might spend that time in some other way that's just talking about current events or kind of catching up. But real quickly, you see on the screen, we've done the welcome and call to order. We'll move to these breakout rooms in just a minute or two. I know we're about 3 minutes behind. Our first item after that will be around the community engagement work and grantee site visits that have been happening, and just figuring out ways to ensure that council members are kind of plugged in and aware. Various council members have already been plugged into those efforts already. So I will lead that. Typically, Paul Sell, who is our re-engagement manager and also leads our grant management team, he would typically facilitate that, but he's actually out today, so I'll take it on, but we'll have the help of our grant managers themselves to kind of share some of their observations. So we'll be a team effort on that. We'll take a little break. Then we'll move to an update on legislation policy and our strategic plan. I think we'll kind of break those up into two things. First, a bit about legislation and policy. We'll probably actually then come to the state advisory group. And if I'm not mistaken, then we'll do the strategic plan after. So we've changed the order a little bit actually, I think it'll go legislation and policy, then state advisory group, then committee updates, then we'll do a strategic plan update, and then we'll do the director's update. So a little bit of change in order on things. That state advisory group time slot around 10, is that, Melissa, is that time accurate? It'd probably be a little earlier.
I think the state advisory group shifted to about 10:15.
Yeah, okay, so that will be a little early. I'm pointing that one out. Anya, Molly, other member, Christina, I know Tabidi's on that committee, the Juvenile Justice Committee, Akivi's on that group, Sam's on that group. I mean, have been doing a lot of really great work. And so we will have a vote around their recommendation on county resubmissions around the equity and inclusion question. So I know if you've got to kind of come in and out, we want to make sure we've got quorum and can take a vote around, after a quick presentation and context setting, I imagine around 10:35, 10:40, we'll take a vote for the State Advisory Group Juvenile Justice Committee update. And then, as Melissa said, we'll, after my director's update, we'll end it with public comment. I don't know if we can move through things quickly, we will do so, but we want to give you ample time to ask questions, for us to actually have conversation. We're trying to do our best to not just overwhelm you with information, but to kind of ask some key questions along the way. And I think while there's a lot in this agenda, there, as I said, only I think one vote, and it, as I think about it, a lot of information will be shared, but I don't think we will, hopefully not overwhelm you. So that's the agenda review. Are there any questions or comments about the agenda? Again, there's some things that have changed. So what you are seeing on screen, we've had to adjust the order and the times a little bit, but we'll cover all those topics. Okie dokie. I don't know if we've got any new, I've heard that the system chime a couple times, Melissa. I don't know if you have any new additions to the meeting, but if either, Celeste or Tabidi or anyone else that's a council member that has recently joined, say hello.
I think I saw Adrian pop
Yeah.
back in. So I don't think there are any other council members who have joined, but if we're ready to move into the breakout rooms.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to release you to some breakout rooms. In a minute.
Melissa, I'll say as you're doing that, just real quickly, where we will go in, these will probably be a little shorter. We'll probably, I get you people I think want to move. We'll go for about 20 minutes. Let's say somewhere around 9 or 8:50, 8:55, you'll get a notice to end, and then we'll get folks back together. And I think 9, and we'll do a little report out, just if there are any things that came up, for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll get started again. So this will probably be a little shorter, but I don't know, I get the feeling with people's schedules being pretty full and packed that if we can move through these in about 20 minutes, that feels like the right time. Does anybody have a different opinion on that? No, my experience too is that for the first 5 or 10 minutes, people kind of get like, and then all of a sudden things start happening and it's 8:50, and then you're like, you wish you had more time. So we'll try to be sensitive to that.
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Thanks, Brian.
Melissa.
Hi, Lacey. Would you, are you comfortable with me putting you into a breakout room so you can join the discussions?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I want to become more involved. That's why I logged on this morning.
Oh, excellent. Well, welcome. Thank you. I'm going to just pop you into one of these rooms. Hang on 1 minute.
Thank you.
Sure. I think I can. I'm not used to working back in Zoom, so let me put you in one of these rooms. Oh. Morning, Jeff. Morning, Molly. We have just entered breakout rooms, so I'm trying to get everyone into the breakout rooms. Here we go. I'm gonna zoom you into one, okay?
Perfect.
Thank you. And whoops, where'd you go? Oh, did it? Sorry, I probably paused because I was doing. Oh, it says recipient. Oh, let's see. Send anyway. And let me put that email address in there. It'll take me just a minute.
All right, Melissa, thanks for getting us all in.
Zoomed in, zoomed out.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome back. And I think, Melissa, do you want to kind of, I think groups, we're going to give you a chance to report back in 2 or 3, I don't know, 1 or 2 minutes, not too long, so we can kind of get on to our next item. So I don't know what if there's like a group one or what, and then also I know Tabidi has joined us. Tabidi, really appreciate your being here. I know you're trying to get into the kind of more detailed agenda. We'll work on that. But then, Tabidi, once we do this report out, we can you can help us get into the other items of the agenda. But we have a few minutes to get there. Melissa, do you want to pick a group?
Sure. We have room one, which was Abraham, Christina, Eric, Lacey, and Zan. Is your group ready to report out?
Sure. Zan Ojuro here. I'm volunteered to report out on our behalf. And we had a great discussion. It was wonderful just to do a round of introductions and to, in some cases, renew our acquaintances and others to get to know one another a little bit better. That's what I miss most about not meeting in person, is just getting to know everyone and their rich stories and what everyone brings to the table. So beyond that, we had we're beginning a robust discussion about some of the new challenges for our smaller nonprofits operating in the youth development space with respect to liability coverage for sexual abuse and other potential challenges in that arena. And that was, Abraham had brought up a couple of points there about the fact that there's no prohibition in grants to using funds for additional insurance costs. And perhaps we can serve as a bridge for some of our nonprofits to address those concerns, but probably needs a bigger fix. So it was a bit of a somber conversation in that sense. Anyone else from the group want to chime in?
I think there was a question if we were ever going to do the council meeting in person. I think that came up.
I'll chime in. This is Melissa. I think that's a great question. I think that we hope to in the somewhat near future. And I think the plan will be hybrid to accommodate anyone who can't make it in person or who isn't comfortable with that yet. We're not able to attend in person. Thank you, room one. Should we move on to room two, which was, let's see, we had Alice Perry, Brian Detman, Diana Rojas, Jared Shaw, Maricela Ortega, and Rafi Miller.
Hi, this is Rafi Miller for the record. Our group had similar introductions, just kind of get to know you, checking in. We talked about just appreciating the pause and the responsiveness to the land acknowledgement a little bit. Also shared just kind of personal, professional updates, different career opportunities, moving, and then just kind of experiences meeting people that we've previously only known online, and then finding ways to meet them in person or showing up in a meeting in person and realizing this is the first time you've actually seen this human with your own eyes. That was about it.
Thanks, Rafi. Anyone else from room two before we move on? Thank you. Room three is Adrian, Cord, Janine, Molly Burns, Molly Rogers, and Sam Coe. How about that? I got both Mollys in the same room. Did not realize. All right, room three, your turn.
Yes, it's Adrian Livingston, and it was nice to just talk with everyone and get started this way. We talked about a lot of my work in the area of sex trafficking awareness and prevention, and kind of, are there agencies or nonprofits helping in the state? And we talked about the ones that are there, but also how so many are closing, and that the need is great for resources. And we, also shared a bit of what was happening with a person that was trying to come and decriminalize prostitution in the state of Oregon, and the implications that would have even on the youth that we serve. It would be they're an extremely vulnerable population. Thankfully, that has been withdrawn for now, but we just talked about that. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay.
I would just say that you shared a bit about what you refer to as the equality model, which was an approach that you brought up where the focus is on decriminalizing victims of trafficking. And I'm really interested in learning more about that. So I'm curious to see what resources are out there. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks, Adrian, in room 3. Room 4, our last room was Bill Hansel, Karen Spencer, Parasa Chenrami, and Tanisha Bishop.
I don't think we had a volunteer, but I'm happy to kick us off for group 4. And then Karen, if you want to chime in and add to what our group update. So we spent a good chunk of time in the beginning just providing personal life updates, checking in to see how each other was doing. And then we got into the more meatier questions around things that we'd like to see out of today's meeting, and the future of the council and the division's work. Some of the things that we touched on was reviewing how might we be leveraging trauma-informed approaches in our work, and in some of our work outside of the council. Some of our group members had shared just current projects they're working on and what that made them think for their work in the context in relation to the council. We also talked about sustainability of the work moving forward as we transition out of the pandemic. And then let's see here. One of our group members had also mentioned talking and hearing more about the success stories, the stories of triumph, especially from our grantees. And over time, perhaps there will be more opportunities to connect in person or either this hybrid format in collaboration with our grantees. And then the other thing that our group had mentioned was how are we applying a stronger equity lens in our support for grantees and prospective grantees, especially outside of the metro area. And this was in specific relation to folks out in Eastern Oregon. So thinking about some of the unique community components out in Eastern Oregon. What are some things we need to think about? Rate of reliability and the questions we ask when we're working with prospective grantees and current grantees out of the Eastern Oregon region. So I think that's about it, but I'm looking to Karen and Jeff and Bill and Tanasia to see if I missed anything.
We briefly just talked about the changing legislative landscape that's going to be happening with the election and what that might mean for legislative policy.
Good point. Is that the last group, Melissa?
That is it. Thank you, groups.
All right. Well, it's 9:01. Robin couldn't be here. The emergency family situation came up. So fortunately, we have a vice chair who's now done this a couple times. And Tabidi is here. So Tabidi, I think, do you now have access to the detail?
I do.
Sweet.
So what I'm under, go ahead.
No, you after you, please.
Well, my understanding is now we're slated to move into a discussion around the community engagement and council involvement updates and discussions. So that would be Brian, you, and the grant managers.
Right. We will do that. And just real quick before we do that, I don't know, Melissa, we've had a few additional people join us, if I'm not mistaken. I see Molly, I see Jeff, I see Celeste,
And Tabidi. Yep.
And I'm here. Yeah.
Somebody named Tabidi. So I think is that I don't know if any of the three or four of you all want to say anything other than what I just said. But hello and thanks for being here.
Well, I'll start. I'm sorry with the tardy arrival. Long story I won't go into, but it's good to be here with everyone. And that's it.
Thanks, Tabidi.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. This is Celeste. I'm also apologizing for arriving late. I'm in parenting mode from 8 to 9, but I'm glad to be here now. And I'm expecting a call from the school. So in just a minute, I'm going to hop off when it arrives, but I'll be here with everyone for the rest of the day. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Any other hello comments?
I think we're good.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to jump into kind of an update around the work we've been doing around community engagement. And Melissa, do you want to share screen or should I? What's the? Oh, look at that! You just did it. Thank you, Melissa. All right, so we've, in this virtual world, I'm sure you have seen your share of PowerPoint decks, and guess what? You will be seeing a few today, but it just feels like the best, at least most, if not the best, at least most practical way for us to share information and then be able to post it publicly and have it all in one place, et cetera, et cetera. So just wanted to kind of start with an overview and then try to, if there are comments or questions along the way, let me know. Again, I think said this at the top, but I'll repeat. Paul Sell, who's been really the primary person along with Tanasia and others kind of organizing the work to get staff visiting our grantees and meeting new and creating new relationships in communities around the state. So Paul couldn't be here today. He's on leave, but he and I have spoken a lot, and he's helped to develop this presentation. And then our grant managers will be a part of just sharing some of their insights as well. And we just had a group of folks who were out in the Southern Oregon region, like yesterday, well, from Monday to Wednesday. So current stuff. All right, Melissa, next slide. So our purpose around this community engagement work really is and continues to be around kind of co-creating our community investment grant priorities to better meet the needs in the 23-25 biennium, and then to develop and gather feedback around YDD's vision for community investment, impact in near and long term. So what can we do from a policy perspective, a funding perspective, even more practical perspective? And this even, I'll say even just taking it to one step higher, right? The governor's office asked agencies across the board to do community engagement work around their budget or aspects of their budget leading up to the submission of budgets that happens in the sort of fall timeframe. So our specific focus again is around our community investment grant priorities, because we feel like there's immediate opportunity there. But again, our broader vision is also, I think, something that we want to talk about, and I feel like can impact the longer term work of the agency and of the council. So that's our purpose. The components of engagement, to be clear, and that some of these things are overlapping and connected, at least particularly the first two things. So our staff and some council members who have been involved in this. Molly, thanks so much for being like a major organizer. We've been doing grantee site visits in this spring and in summer. We've been doing some outreach and relationship building, talking to some grantees who weren't awarded YDD funding, for example, but also some new folks, right? There's turnover, there's new folks, as you might imagine, all the time. So we continue to do that. Like we'll visit a grantee, and then maybe we'll also go to a meeting that's a collection or a consortium or a collaborative, whatever name it goes by, a group of folks who said, hey, come to our regular monthly meeting, or hey, we're willing to come together so we can all meet folks and staff from YDD. So some of that has happened as we've done these visits. And then the more specific, what we'll call community engagement, which is really a set of community meetings, listening sessions, and some surveys, will really happen in the fall, and probably in that late September, October timeframe. We're still designing what that will look like, and would love your input and feedback and questions about that sort of third phase. But that will, again, all that we wanted to do this initial work, these first two steps, so that we could come back to communities in the fall and have some conversation. And so those are the components. Next slide. Well, maybe Melissa, go back. Sorry. Any questions about this? Kind of the purpose and those three phases, if you will. I don't see any hands, or I don't see anything. Okay. Cord and I primarily were developed this plan, in the spring for the governors of winter, spring. So Cord's been a big piece of the development here too. Karen, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was anything that you found like surprising, shocking, different, that you might be able to relate about any site visits so far.
Yes, that's coming. Give us a sec.
Okay.
That's coming here in just a sec. So we'll get to that. Next slide, we'll show you where we've been, and then we'll get to like those observations and takeaways. So just thank you, Abe, for I don't know, I just had this list, like Southern Oregon, South Coast, Eastern Oregon. But then I said, hey, can you create a map? So there's a map. So you can see where we have been so far. Regions, have we been to every corner of every one of these counties? Probably not, but folks have put serious miles in. So the South Coast region we've hit, the Rogue Valley area we've hit, Eastern Oregon. Bill and Paul in particular can speak to Lindsay, who's on our staff, who does different work, and I think she's actually in Eastern Oregon now. There's a lot of driving to get to some of the locations that we've gotten to. So kudos to the staff who've been able to, who just dedicated the time to get out to Northeastern Oregon and Southeastern Oregon and had some good conversations, and we'll hear from those staff here in a minute. Next slide. And so what's yet to happen, and what we're moving into is kind of these quadrants, these counties, and in some ways we hit some of the regions of the state where we have fewer grants, and now we're coming back into places where we have a more concentration of work. And that will mean we're going to have to make some hard choices, right? Because we have lots of grantees in some of these areas, and we can't talk to all of them in the summer. It's not logistically possible. Folks have plans. We'll do our best. And then we're going to turn around and say, hey, we want to come and talk to you again in the fall. So we're going to have to make some choices and ask people to come together in groups, if you will. And then we also, just to be frank too, we have a number of organizations who have applied who didn't get grants. Some of you may be on the call now. And so we want to engage to the extent that we can. But in some of the other areas of the state, there's two or three grantees and maybe 2 or 3 organizations that didn't get funding. In the I-5 corridor, there's 2 or 3 dozen grantees and 2 or 3 dozen who didn't get funding. We're working on the specifics of that, but just know we're excited about getting to these locations here in the next couple of months, and we will be reporting in September, like more about what we're finding, and then what the fall kind of community engagement and listening sessions look like. Next slide. So now I want to move to I think the question that Karen asked, and I'm not seeing, and these are staff observations. Again, I know Molly has been in some of the meetings. Janine was in a meeting with us just the other day. Maybe there are other council members who, and I'm hopefully not missing anybody, but I want staff to kind of offer some of their observations and highlights from their visits. But again, if there's a council member that was involved too, we'll ask for your observations as well. So I don't know who I want to turn it over to first. Molly, Jared, Bill, Abe, you're up. Is there somebody who, do I just pick one of you to go first? Molly, you're up. Not Molly Rogers, but Molly, the other Molly, Molly Burns.
Great. So I guess I'll just start by saying that, you know, a year and a half into a new job as a grant manager, and we're just opening up to site visits, and it's just been really, it's just been a really tremendous experience, and listening and learning and starting to try to get a feel for differences in location, differences in youth services delivery across the state in these various areas. So we're just getting started. And as I'm on the re-engagement team, I thought I would bring a re-engagement opportunity grantee program highlight, and there is a council member, Janine, who is on this grant. So please, after I give some highlights, please jump in and correct anything, enhance anything that I'm saying. But we had a meeting at the Douglas ESD with the Youth Development Mentor Program. So it is a re-engagement opportunity grant, and just to kind of talk a little bit about the program, the re-engagement program. So the program connects each referred youth with a mentor for one-on-one holistic support. And so the way that re-engagement program design was described was really, you're putting a caring adult relationship building at the center of the program, and then developing strong partnerships to help the youth get the resources. So for example, partnering for the mental health counseling component, or for a jobs training program. And so the services to youth through these mentors, and the mentors were there. They've got incredible experience working with youth, and it's a very strong component of the program. And so they're coaching youth through and around barriers, co-creating goals, and supporting them through the implementation of the goals, working on workforce aspects, CTA pathways, making sure finding those connections and that access. And because this is a re-engagement program, an important component is advocacy for youth within the schools, and ensuring that those educational services are being accessed, and that educational progress is being met within that. And being through the ESD, they have 13 different school districts, they're really working on multiple partnerships. They have a youth advisory crew, and they're really using their data collection to understand re-engaged youth, which is fantastic. And one component to highlight of their program is that they've created a referral system that they've put online so that schools, staff, family, even youth self-referral, and the youth network in their area, there's a central place where they really made it easy on the computer, on a mobile device, to refer youth to the mentors to get those services. And they're also working on outreach on really accessing youth to bring them back to education. So I don't know if Janine has anything to add.
No, Molly, that was awesome. Do you want to come join our outreach team and communicate our program?
Absolutely.
I just have to say it was a real, it was a delight to have, I understand that I wear two hats with this one. So, but it was a delight to have the YDD team come down, and my team felt really validated and heard and seen and connected. We can get pretty isolated down here in Douglas County, so felt connected to the larger work. And so it was a very worthwhile for us to have that conversation. And we only wish that you guys were able to stay with us for the whole day. So thank you.
Thank you both. Commissioner Ozer, I see you have your hand up.
Indeed, thank you for that impression, and Janine for your feedback from that with the dual hat. One of my questions is, especially with the self-referral capacity, what do you have enough mentors? Do you have enough capacity in the program?
That is a great question. We are always keeping our eye on that. I would say we don't, but we're also trying to marry the understanding from our community and the level of comfort, and while we're simultaneously deepening that trust. And right now it's proven to be something that we can handle and balance. We're actually bringing a third mentor on. And then I think with a lot of the work that's happening with integrated guidance and the Student Success Act within our school districts, we do anticipate that will be this support and service, this value add that we're providing for our school districts will become an increasing need. And so we're thinking creatively about how do we tap into some of our school districts to support that as a term for sustainability too for us as we grow the program. But right now we've managed the sweet spot, but I do keep an eye. I mean, we've gone from, I think we've increased about 200% from last year to this year in terms of referrals. So we know that question is going to become an issue quite soon. So thank you for asking.
Well, thank you.
All right, thanks. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us forward. Hey, Bill, you're up.
Thank you. Yeah, it was as many, I think, just to echo, it was great to get out on the road after several years. I'll start as one of the few staff that has kind of a pre-travel and then COVID and then post-COVID travel. One of the things that did strike me that is interest would be fatigue / burnout among providers. You know, it was evident to me where, like, I'd seen before, just, you know, that, as you might imagine, typical to youth workers, that kind of vibrancy and smiles and that type of thing pre-COVID, and so seeing it was more of a kind of a muted, like heavy, you know, it's just been a heavy couple of years, and I think we're all dialed in with how the trauma and ACEs and stuff, the trauma-informed practice relates to youth, but also I think it's important to keep in mind how we might be able to support our providers, because I think it's probably that type of fatigue, and many of you might be in that situation yourself. Anyway, that was one thing that was evident to me. One of the many neat things that I learned that in Southern southeastern Oregon. There's a school districts that actually have schools on wheels because at one time, whatever family had the largest number of kids, they'd pull the school onto that, that property, and that's where school was for that year. So I learned that. Big thanks to Molly Rogers. It was, and all the time, just fascinating to be able to meet with juvenile directors and not be focused on JCP funds alone, but tapping the juveniles director's awareness of all the youth providing services. And it was a brand new avenue, and it was like connecting the dots, I think, in a lot of instances, and that was hugely valuable. And then finally, it was super awesome. One of out in Union County, they started, it was basically a gentleman that was a somewhat renowned chef that had one of that characteristic of resiliency, left home at like 12 because he thought he could take better care of himself than the situation he was in, and had worked himself into a position of being a chef, wanted to do something for kids in any way. Through a partnership with the juvenile department there, some youth get to learn job skills and life skills training by kind of mentoring with this gentleman at a fine dining restaurant. And we got to sit down and get served a dinner by some youth that are working for this gentleman in a nice restaurant, and just seeing the professional skills and pride that these youth had in both preparing and then interacting with strange adults at a table was just very cool to see. And what was the last one? Oh, the other neat one was learning that some of our grantees are accessing schools through Mckinney-Vento, which is they call it the national federal dollars for homeless youth or unsheltered youth. But that was kind of a light bulb moment for me of like, I wonder, I've known of the supports for Mckinney-Vento, but actually having grantees that now have an office or a space in a high school to deliver these services was also very cool. So if there's any questions, happy to take that, but that was some of my gleanings from the road.
Thanks, Bill. Are there any hands? Commissioner Ozer, I see your hand is still up, but maybe that was from the last one. Okay, you're good. If there's no, thanks so much, Bill. Let's go to Jared.
Great, thank you. So I will give a bit of a workforce perspective. I was on the trip to Southern Oregon this week with Molly and Paul, and we stopped by Umpqua Community College, and through their Bright Futures Umpqua program, they are doing a pre-apprenticeship program. And so they've partnered with 4 schools in the area to bring pre-apprenticeship classes and programming to those 4 schools, high schools, to get youth involved in the trades and interested in the trades, and then into the apprenticeship program. And I think one thing that really struck me in our travels is the power that our dollars have and the change that they can make, especially in rural areas. And we know that, despite attention on pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs at the federal level lately, there still is so much need. And we were told that were it not for YDD dollars, this program would not exist. So it's really making a tremendous change in that area. It's exposing youth to options that they would not have had otherwise in an area where a lot of youth would benefit from it. So it just struck me that was really powerful, and that they're able to get this program off the ground that they've been thinking about for years and just were not able to find the resources. And because of YDD dollars, they are now able to do it. So that's that. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jared.
Zan Ozer again. I do have a quick question, and that is a similar one to I asked Janine earlier. in terms of the long-term viability of the program, I'm assuming that YDD can't support that kind of a pre-apprenticeship program in perpetuity, but is there a sustainability plan?
I think that's very much in discussion. That's something that we, of course, our grants are competitive, but I think, yeah, we were just told that it's enabled them to kind of launch the program, and now they've got those partnerships that they're working with in place. And so I think, perhaps through those partnerships and through those ongoing discussions in the area, they'll be able to kind of get this on wheels and keep it up and running. So we'll see what happens there.
Thank you, Jared. Karen.
I have a question. So if we're gearing folks up to go into the trades, do you think that there's interest in the trades helping to support these pre-apprenticeship programs?
I think absolutely. I think they've partnered with several organizations in the area. They are working with their employers and with the college and with the schools, and I think there's a need. What we heard is that there really is just a struggle to find youth and employers to fill certain trades, and so I think they're working very hard on that communication with employers in the area and with those who can provide those job opportunities.
My guess is, and Jared or Cord could speak to this too, that this grantee, this program is probably a good candidate for Future Ready Oregon dollars. And Cord will talk a little bit about that, I think, later. So, Future Ready Oregon dollars we're going to be putting out ours hopefully in the next couple of weeks, right? A grant opportunity, and then we'll do a second round in the fall. Then, assuming the legislature passes the piece of, or passes a budget that includes additional funding for Future Ready Oregon in the next biennium, for us probably using federal recovery dollars, there should be additional resources. So the potential is, at least for a program like this and other similar programs, that they may be they'll be eligible for a YDD grant or two. There's a even bigger part of money through the Higher Education Coordinating Commission for dollars and opportunities as well through workforce boards. So there's a good amount of dollars for the next year and a half, well, let's say next 3 years, assuming all goes as planned. That I imagine will potentially get them some more runway. I don't know, Cord or Jared, did any of that come up?
It did. Yeah, so we discussed it briefly and just, potential future opportunities there. So we will see what happens.
Great. All right. We've got about, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Melissa can help us on time here. Maybe there's
9 minutes. You have 9 minutes.
Taviti's on it. Thank you, Taviti. So I'm going to turn to Abe, I think, and then I'm going to share some overarching kind of takeaways and questions we're asking ourselves internally. So Abe, you're up, and then I'll round us out.
Okay. So kind of echo some of the things that were said earlier, because I kind of heard, I had done some site visits, over a month ago to some of our grantees in Southern Oregon, but kind of what Bill brought up in regard to some of the burnout and kind of the capacity issues related to some of the organizations we fund, but also what we heard, not just within that context, but also within the context of schools, right? Where a lot of our grantees partner with schools, and they themselves are now seeing, they saw it during the pandemic, and there's a whole population of youth that missed 2 years of going to school in person, and some of the behavioral issues that we saw earlier in the year, last fall, right? And how that kind of reverberated a little bit, right? With all of a sudden, it just translated to that going to the nonprofits as well, where sometimes they didn't feel they had the capacity. On top of that, our nonprofits were also impacted by the current economic situation, the Great Resignation, I guess it's being called, where they're trying to hire, but having also a hard time filling those positions at times, right? Depending where they're at. So that was something that, was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that just makes your work a lot harder, right? At the same time, though, we also saw, because of COVID, for some organizations, obviously during COVID, some of them started turning, they couldn't do regular programming as they used to. So they started taking on other, they pivoted a little bit and started doing some sort of relief efforts, right? Which is great, obviously, during that time. But in that, they also discovered other needs in their community that before they may have not been acutely aware of. And all of a sudden, a whole new area of serving opened up for them as well. And they were actually able to grow a little bit, and change kind of, increase more broadly who they were serving in regards to youth and families, right? So that was something that was really interesting. Others also talked about now, since everything's online, how opportunity to share the work that they're doing with other entities across the United States, right? We're talking to Resolve, one of our grantees, and them doing trainings, but for other entities outside of Oregon, right? These opportunities that presented themselves. So that was also something that I was like, oh, wow, that's really neat. Again, being able to see things kind of in person and see how much our grantees have been able to, so much kind of what Jet was saying, not only use our funding to serve youth, but also to leverage that funding to access other funding, right? And then start growing the organization and who they're serving, the types of resources they can offer. Going from one location and now having a whole other building and expanding to another county. So that's something that I was like, wow, okay, these are things that, the way our funds kind of reverberate across. So that was something that I thought was really impactful, and just seeing how our grantees, those grantees that are able to sustain funding, whether it be through leveraging or continuously getting our funding, and seeing how the impact. So there's one youth that I'd seen previously in other previous years that I visited. And I saw that youth again, a little older now. And, I was able to participate in a youth council with Cow Creek, the tribe. They had a youth council summit. And, I saw the youth again. And it was just interesting talking with, at that time of the staff, and seeing how this youth has grown from being kind of a closed guarded youth, right? And they're becoming teenagers, right? And instantly in that 2 days I was there, right, from the youth really being apprehensive, from wanting to participate in some of the activities, kind of having some sort of really social anxiety, really is what it was. But sticking with it and having that group, that peer group that supported him through this, right? Said, no, come on, right? And all of a sudden, the next day, seeing him participate and get on stage. From one day, the youth who didn't want to be there vocally said it not once, not multiple times, he didn't want to be there. To the next day in the evening, put himself on stage in front of everybody, right? Which was amazing. I was like, wow, But again, that type of impact, that type of work, that peer group, those youth, right? What we're doing, that impact, right? I mentioned it earlier in our breakout. I feel really lucky to be in that type of position to actually see that. But yeah, that's kind of some of the observations that I saw when I was out on my visits.
Thank you, Abe. All right, appreciate those reports. Thanks, grant managers. Thanks for council members who have helped and will continue to help. It's just been really, really great to be out again. And I was able to join for a couple of meetings in the Hood River and the Dalles. So that was, so I've been able to get out on the road. I know we just have a few minutes left. Unless there are other questions, I'm seeing stuff in the chat, but want to kind of keep us on schedule. If Melissa, you'll move to the next slide.
Ryan, sorry,
Yeah,
I
please,
have
one
quick question or recommendation. Over time, I've seen council, there's been some really nice visits, just like we've seen. And I'm just curious about if you think it's a good idea to have staff write up observations in like a bulleted memo, because at this point, I don't remember what we talked about 2 years before. I don't remember what we talked about 4 years before, but I think it would be really interesting if there was some way to either share it or record it so that over time we could track what we're doing and see trends. And I know that what we've done before, I don't know that we've captured it in that way. And so I'm curious if there's just any way to take these observations and record them.
So staff, after each visit, are like sort of creating some pretty detailed notes from each of the visits that they have. Paul has created kind of a document where for each visit there's like a here's what we heard, here's who we met with, here's where we went, and then some of those observations. So I'm imagining, and maybe staff can, I have access to them and have looked at them, and I'm guessing, hoping that what happened just here today was that staff sort of picked one or two of those, meeting notes and said, okay, here are some points that I want to make in today's YDC meeting. So we are capturing that and for each visit, and what we do with that, I guess, beyond sort of sharing it in this context, is maybe something we should continue to discuss. And I suppose even just by both having the meeting today and recording it, and some of the things that I'm about to share here, we are kind of memorializing in some way. Sam is asking about I don't know what I think, Sam, you're gonna have to, the visitation form be shared. I might want to utilize the form when I conduct my informal site visit. We're happy to share like the template. I know there's a template. I saw it. So we can definitely share that. But in short, Celeste, I think, yes, we're memorializing and capturing information. A blank visitation. I didn't know what a black visitation form was. I was excited though about what you meant by that, Sam. So, and since this is all building towards this work in the fall, I think we're doing a decent job of Sam, you don't need to apologize, of capturing the information, Celeste, and we'll share the form too. So just some things here. I mean, but Celeste, I appreciate your point, and I guess I kind of wanted to summarize some of the things that, some of these pieces I think you've heard, but right in maybe in this slide, here's a bit of a quick summary, I guess, of things that we're hearing so far. There's been, I think, lots of discussion in these meetings and conversations around like, how do we focus? This is something that I'm passionate about. You've heard me hopefully say this before, and I think it's a real direction that YDD should be going in, is right, funding, not just at an individual program level, but funding almost at a broader systems level, prevention and resiliency. Like, how do we actually create systems, or a system that is a prevention system? Now, I'm not a big fan of that word, prevention, not because I like preventing bad things, but how do we actually promote good things like resiliency, mental health, and well-being? So don't have that all figured out, but we're hearing, I think, from stakeholders, a real desire in that direction. The staff capacity issues, that you heard some of the staff just speak to that, like real challenges around hiring, retaining, training skilled workers, and to operationalize some of the initiatives in the work, right? What I took away from some of the conversations I have is that there's real desire to drive on, a number of it, whether it's pre-apprenticeship or homeless issues or equity issues for that matter. But some staff and organizations are just so stretched thin. It's like, I'm one person and I want to do all these things, but I'm literally a one-woman job. How I can't do all the things. And so we are just hearing that and making sense of it. Because I think it does mean that, as you might imagine, some things don't get done, or things can't get done. So just want to reflect that back. There is real appreciation that our funding is flexible and that it can really support community-driven local work. One of the things that we're hearing, since we visited so far some communities that are not big populations, is that they're having an impact on a small number of youth, and that impact is amazing and strong and deep, and we should value that, and we do. And then there are other grantees in other areas of the state, right, that are impacting hundreds and thousands, right, because the population sizes. But valuing both is something that we're hearing from in our meetings. And to be even more direct, I think that sometimes people are wondering, like, do you understand? We got 12 kids, and we're having an amazing impact, but the cost for those 12 kids looks like really high, and to compare that impact versus the thousands, some organizations in counties and in locations are like, we feel like we're getting compared inappropriately in some way, and I think we value both, right? We value that deep impact you can have with a small group of kids, and we value where there's just frankly a larger population that you may be impacting lots of more young people. A couple of other few points, wanting to continue to center racial equity and justice and focus on the most vulnerable populations, it's challenging, particularly as we have had some conversations in areas more rural and frontier parts of the state, that the conversations are different. And I am just reminded, and then as a takeaway for me, that as we center those most vulnerable populations, that all populations benefit. And so while I think there's some hard conversation, I've been in some of the meetings where people are asking, well, when we'll talk later about our juvenile crime prevention plans and the question 6 and some of the responses. I think we got some really great resubmissions. There still is, I think, work to be done, as you might imagine, around the equity work and the justice work, racial justice work, and having conversations with organizations about how, right, stay focused on those vulnerable populations. When you start solving those, I think you actually start to you start to solve some of the deeper issues for all populations. And there's work to be done at a system level too.
Brian.
Yes, please, Tabiti.
You hit such a high and clear note with the last point that I thought that might be a good point, a good place to just sort of say, I think we've reached the point of our break. But if when we come back, we take a 10-minute break, 9:45 to 9:55, and resume with legislation and policy update. But I think we might be okay if people had another question or so when we came back from break about this. Okay.
Well, maybe are you saying I should take a pause here and hold on that note?
This is Melissa. I also can't remember how many slides are left. Brian, do you remember? Or is this the last one?
There's a next step slide.
Okay.
Oh, okay, well, we shouldn't stop. You should get to the next step.
Okay, but I will appreciate that, Tavita. I can go quickly, but I will pause. And are there any comments or questions just about what you're reading and that last point? I don't want to just blow through it, like, because that's something that I say this all the time, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so that we continue to be in that equity conversation and with many of our site grantees and the visits that we're having. So all right, Jeff saying good. Christina, thank you. Thank you, Christina. I will hit these last few points. You keep throwing stuff in the chat. Wait, go back. So I don't need to read all of these. Systemic and structural issues. There's deep resilience in the communities that we're going. There's real creativity that we're seeing despite the challenges. And then we've gotten some specific feedback around our RFA and our application evaluation and some great ideas about, and we're mulling these ideas about how to improve our RFA, how do we get more youth involved, maybe college age students, how do we get more local community folks involved by really pushing some of those local institutions so that we can have local knowledge about what programs are doing. So there's some things that we're already stewing on to improve our application evaluation processes. Next slide, and then I'll be done. I know we're a few minutes behind. Thanks, Melissa. So, it did something weird, didn't it? Oh, there it is. So we'll continue to visit. We'll get to Sam's question. We've got government-to-government meetings and tribal consultation that we'll be working on. As I said, I think that engagement with youth voice and youth support, there's a specific task in turn, right, that we need to do as a part of this process, which is to develop racial impact statements for our legislative concepts and policy option packages. And then we need to work on the development of our presentation that we're going to take to the fall. I want to, since this question is coming up, I might ask Cord, who, and I don't know if Anya's on, but this question about insurance requirements that is in the media. I saw a story on OPB, maybe one in the Oregonian. Yeah, so.
Do you want to read that from since it's in the chat comments, Brian, or?
Yeah, I'm reading it from the chat comments.
I mean, read it out loud for the meeting.
Oh, sorry, sure. Thank you, Melissa. Good point. So Sam asked, well, how about this? Maybe do y'all want to take a quick break and then come back on the other side and answer this? Or should we do it now? Edie.
Yeah, let's take the break and then people come back and then let's answer it, because otherwise it's going to be robust discussion, I can see, and at least we'll be on the other side of the break. How about that?
Celeste and others, Sam and others, we'll take it up. Cord, since I think you're on tap next anyway, if I'm not mistaken, if you don't mind, you can do a little preparation.
This is Cord. Yeah, I'll try to condense. I have a lot to say about this, but I'll try to get it done in 30 seconds or more.
All right, Edie, how long of a break do we have?
Well, we're supposed to have a 10-minute break. So if we do that, that puts us starting again at 10.
Okay.
I think we'll catch up. So, okay.
Thank you all.
Okay. Let's resume at 10. Thanks all.
Clock. It is 10 o'clock, and we're sorry you only got 9 minutes, but we will. Cord, and I just want to make sure I'm straight. Brian, are you going to follow up, and then Cord will segue behind you, or Cord will sort of pick up the threads? I just want to make sure, because Cord, you're set for next.
Yeah, thanks, Tabidi. I guess I'm basically done. If there were any follow-up questions to the piece that I just presented, I'm happy to take those. But I think there was a specific question which relates to, frankly, some feedback and so on. So Tabidi, I think unless I see a hand or see something,
Okay.
I've done my part, and I think Cord, you can pick up that last question and then kind of move into your update. But I think it's a good segue because there's some interrelated pieces there.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, Court, if
Thanks,
that's
Tabidi.
okay with you. Yeah.
Sure, I'm ready. So I'm really happy that the second link got dropped in here. I was just scanning that article that Celeste shared. So we've seen the OPB article. I think something that might not be clear in the OPB article is that it's not an ODE requirement, but this is actually a state Department of Administrative Services requirement. All insurance requirements for recipients of state funds are really at the state level and not agency discretion. The article in the Oregon Capitol Chronicle actually provides some information I had not seen, which, we've been looking into this. Yes, to answer the question, it affects YDD grantees. We have talked with DAS risk analysts and the head of DAS risk analysis about this particular, it's called physical abuse and molestation insurance, at least in our risk assessment. Whenever we're developing any of our grant opportunities, we do a risk assessment for what types of insurance we should require. And that's per the DAS requirements for any grants that we put out there. Generally speaking, most of our grants have this requirement because they're providing direct services to young people. Certainly any program serving minors, where there are adults coming in contact with minors, this is a requirement. I think maybe in the second article in the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, it mentions the fact that this is a separate insurance from your general liability. General liability does not cover an organization for this kind of an issue. What it looks like is that there's actually now a possibility of legislative action around this. Right now, the state itself cannot provide insurance to a grant recipient. That's something they're exploring for special cases like this. Some insurers do not provide this coverage. It is very expensive. The only solution that we see potentially is that if it's an operational cost, a grantee could use funds from a grant for it. But as pointed out, if you don't know you need this and then you have a grant you're trying to start yesterday, the time that it takes to get an insurance policy in place or even figure out where to get it if your provider does not offer it can be really difficult. We're trying to make sure folks know about this requirement up front. We do have the insurance requirements, the grant agreement, a sample is put out there with our applications, but we're going to try to really call attention to this so folks know. We've brought it even to the attention of the RJC. They've been doing some work around contracting equity for the state. We're just trying to get attention on it. It looks like that's now happening for unfortunate reasons. There's finally some seriousness, in looking at this. But it is actually, the insurance is certainly essential for it's kind of for the safety of organizations, because if they do not have it and an incident occurs while youth is in their care, it could be catastrophic for certainly any nonprofit, but a smaller nonprofit would be particularly vulnerable to catastrophic lawsuit. And likewise has to defend the state as per their grant agreements, from any action that would come out of the operation of that program. So that's kind of where it's at, is that we recognize the necessity. I think the goal is really to figure out how to make the insurance more accessible to all the organizations we're trying to reach with grant money. Sorry, it wasn't 30 seconds, but that's my spiel.
Hey, I have a question quickly.
Sure.
So what sort of solutions are being derived? Is there some sort of kind of a collective, or putting them under a larger group for a temporary amount of time, or what's happening in that regard?
Sure. So, I'll just quickly respond to Celeste's comment. So one thing we're looking at is we don't judge applications on budget. We have programs that have 90% of their funds in operations or 90% in personnel that we have requested budgets. We're actually even moving away from requiring a budget for an application. We're going to be testing that with Future Ready. So we don't want to judge programs on how they're using the funds, but rather on who they're serving, how they're serving them, and other criteria we're measuring them on. As far as solutions to BD, I mean, I think that the most viable large-scale solution in this Oregon Capitol Chronicle, Senator Dimbro is particularly interested in this issue. There's a possibility, it sounds like he and ODE are discussing legislation that would allow the state to offer insurance to contractors in specific situations such as this. So really changing state law. So the state, and part of the issue is that you have to have the coverage in perpetuity because there's no statute of limitations for a claim. So essentially what would happen is the state would be saying, we would be insuring for this rather than requiring you to get this specific coverage. That could happen in the September session. And to Sam's question, no, if you are applying for a grant that requires this insurance because of the services you're providing, which would be serving young people, any situation where adults are in contact with minors or other individuals who are vulnerable. I mean, senior living facilities similarly would have to carry this insurance. So it's not just about working with youth. You have to have the insurance to be eligible for funding. And we've required it. It's actually been a requirement since at least 2017 in our grant agreements. It has been a barrier. We do have organizations that have found it difficult to get. We're working with DAS on a few issues right now. We've had grantees turn down funding for this reason. So it's a big issue, and it's one that we're trying to figure out a solution for. But to BD, I think that the real answer is that it requires legislative action to look at state law. But we appreciate folks paying attention to this because it is, now it's really come to a head because it's preventing hundreds of programs from serving young people. And that money, moves quickly, and it's not going to just stick around for this issue to get resolved. So it's really a shame that it's come to this. And yes, Sam, this is true. Any state agency making grants or doing contracts has to use the DAS risk analysis for insurance requirements. All right, should I jump into our legislative and policy update? I see a slide deck coming here. Thank you, Melissa. All right, so I will say for the record, my name is Cord Bucher. I'm Deputy Director here at YDD, and I'm gonna just talk a little bit about what we've got going on in our legislative and policy sphere. Can you get the next slide, please? All right, so we'll start talking about Future Ready Oregon. Next slide, please. Quick background for folks who don't know much about it. Future Ready Oregon is the name for a bill that passed in the short session back in February 2022, Senate Bill 1545. This was a $200 million investment in workforce development programs given to HEC, Higher Education Coordinating Committee, BULI, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and YDD. So the Youth Development Division is named in the bill. We're in Section 7. Priority is for us to serve youth ages 14 to 24 who are out of school, unemployed, or in a YDD re-engagement program. We thought it was important to try to broaden it out. It was originally focused on youth who are in re-engagement programs, but we also wanted to serve any youth who is not in school. So this could include, for example, youth that have earned a GED, but are not enrolled in education or not working. So it's really a broad swath of young people who would benefit from these services. Focuses on work readiness training, educational re-engagement, paid work experience, and connecting young people to jobs. The bill gives us $10.5 million. That's $3.5 million for use between now and June of 2023. So we have about a year for the first portion of funds to get used. There's another $7 million in federal funding. That's the ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act funds. Those dollars are actually available for us to use until the end of the 2025 biennium. So through June 30 of 2025, we have an additional $7 million. A portion of this funding is to pay for a position. We're going to be adding one limited duration. It's actually going to be a policy analyst. Sorry, I grabbed from the wrong slide. We've adjusted the position. It's a program analyst rather, which is a position really focused on grant management and program management. And so we'll be adding one person to our staff to see this through the 2023-25 biennium. Next slide, please. This is just a timeline. So right now we're working really hard to develop the first application for funding. We haven't hired that person yet, so it is something we're working on internally. I'm leading a team of other YDD staff. We're all working together to develop this. Really appreciative of like everyone making time for this, and everything else that we have going on, trying to develop, I think, a really, hopefully a really accessible, but also like effective and accountable application process, but also one that we are going to try to move fast on. So we want to get this launched. Our initial target date is tomorrow. I'm afraid we're not going to make that, hence the lack of numbers there in terms of days of the month, but we do plan to launch in mid-June. We actually have we just got back our first edited version of the application from procurement, who we're working closely with. So we're making progress there. Abraham, I want to give a shout out to, is building out the application and SM Apply. So once we get everything together with procurement, we're going to launch. The application will be open for about 45 days. We'll do the regular info sessions, the sharing, Q&A that we normally do to try to really help folks access and apply for this. The awards planned, announced in August. We'll be getting grant agreements done in September, and then we're going to turn around and do it all again. So we will be doing another process for the federal funds. We'll essentially try to make the grants by the end of 2022, but those funds would actually become available for use in the probably July 1, 2023. So we potentially could have projects start earlier. This is something we're going to look at, because for summer jobs, unfortunately, summer programming doesn't align very well with the state's fiscal calendar. And so because it's federal funding and we already have it, we may be able to work through that in a unique way for this project, but more to come on that. I will just say that we're working to try to get something out really fast. The minimum viable product, but if you call it MVP, it sounds a lot better. I think we'll still be good, but we will have the opportunity to make refinements and really put something out there in the fall that hopefully will reflect what we learn from our partners as we get this thing rolling. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with the grant. So again, we're focusing on the priority populations that are named in the bill. That I could list those off, but I'm happy to answer questions about that separately. Just say that we're serving youth 14 to 24. I've talked about the rounds of the grants. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Really quickly, the service model focuses on two kinds of skill building. So we want to deal with the basic work readiness skills. We'll call them essential employability skills. Those are the soft skills: communication, cooperation, teamwork, time management, organizational skills. That's something we expect from every program. Likewise, supportive and responsive program services. So that's everything from culturally and linguistically responsive programming to meeting students' basic needs, or rather youth's basic needs, work clothes, materials, equipment. Of course, for job programs, that also would include wages. And then there are 3 different program pathways. So paid work experience, where you're hiring youth and paying them in a supportive work environment. Job placement and coaching, where you're placing youth in jobs, helping them to attain employment, and coaching and supporting the youth and the workplace to make sure they keep the job and are successful there. And then industry recognized credentials. So things like certifications, technical skills that are going to give you a pathway to a career. We've had a lot of interest around that. We've had a few different folks inquire if that is a feasible thing that we can support here, and it is. Thanks to the legislation, we'll be able to support programs that give kids real credentials that will help them get jobs. Next slide, please. I'll just say really quickly, we're trying in our work with BOLI and HEC. One of the great things about this bill is the fact that we're cooperating with these other state agencies, and we're trying to use that partnership to really improve the work we do, looking at how we collect data from youth, and can we do that in a more responsive, transparent, effective, trauma-informed way. Looking at how we can support both the youth and the programs serving them around youth employment law and practices, making sure youth know their rights, talking to them about safety in the workplace, and talking to these programs employing youth to make sure that they understand their responsibilities, they have access to technical assistance from BOLI, so that we're making sure that young people are being employed and worked with appropriately. Next slide, please. And the last piece, just we're continuing, we use this every opportunity with grant making to try to improve how we do reporting, how we collect information from grantees. We are working really closely with HEC because all of the reporting for Future Ready goes through them to the legislature. We have to be really accountable with this funding, and we're going to work closely with our partners to do so. So consistency with other programs is important. We also want to make our data collection easier and more responsive to the folks that are giving us data. So we want to make sure that there's value in this for the programs that are reporting to us. They can see their outcomes, and the way we're collecting the information is something that's navigable for programs. We don't want to give them reporting that is hard to submit or hard to do correctly. I think the next slide will be a transition to the next part of this presentation. So I will pause, take a breath. And if anyone has questions about Future Ready, I can try to answer them.
Or there's a question in the chat that Karen asked about.
Oh, someone's going to provide the insurance, it looks like.
Wait, what?
Oh, sorry.
There is something about the insurance, but there's a second question about the percentage of youth, the number of youth who would fit in the priority category.
I mean, the priority populations is a really interesting thing. They're numerous and they're not defined in a very explicit way. One priority population, for example, are individuals who might be more likely to be discriminated against because of age. That was an AARP recommendation, but I would say if you've ever seen a hearing about youth employment, employers have no problem going before the legislature and saying how hard it is to employ youth and how they don't have skills and they don't like to hire them. I would venture to say that every young person under 24 is likely to face age discrimination in the workplace. But the other priority populations would be individuals of color, women, folks in rural and frontier communities, communities of poverty. We do not know what that means. Homeless youth are not included, but we are going to call out programs for youth experiencing homelessness as another focus of our work. There's the priority populations include, I would say, the vast majority of Oregonians by virtue of them being quite numerous. We, because we are trying to serve 14 to 24-year-olds who are disconnected, although that is not a priority population, we are not restricted to only serving youth in a priority population. That's something we're focused on, but it is conceivable that there's a disconnected teenager out there who needs the services, maybe doesn't check the box, but we would serve any disconnected youth in these programs. Yeah, so hot off the presses. Yeah, you heard it here first. There's going to be a solution for the insurance issue for the summer programs. We're actually meeting with ODE procurement about this topic next week, so maybe there will be a solution for us as well. Any other questions on Future Ready?
Hey, I'm just doing a time check. I know you've got a bit more legislative update, and then we're going to get to the state. And Tabitha, you're probably wondering about this too. The
state advisory group.
So are we a little behind by about 5 or so?
Yeah, I was giving court another 5 to 6 minutes. Right. If that's okay.
Yeah,
this is the
took
bulk
a little
of
his time
update.
up. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
And it looks like Karen has her hand up too. Sorry, Court. Sorry, Tabitha.
I just have, I think, a relatively quick question and a barking dog. So I wanted to understand the quick turnaround on the first round of funding and then immediately going to the federal one. Is that just necessitated by how long it takes to get stuff done? Are you trying to avoid like a crush period like around the holidays? Because that's kind of always a strain for nonprofits. I'm trying to understand why it's so quick.
Sure. So we really need to get the general fund dollars out because those will evaporate on July 1, 2023. So the first $3 million we would need to award as soon as possible. We are not setting a cap on how much we will award in round 1. So we could potentially award federal funds depending on the quality of applications, the number of applications, et cetera. But the intention and the expectation is we may not spend all the money in round one, but we do want to try to move quickly to award funds in round two. And it's for a couple of reasons. One, we already plan to have our regular RFAs for community investments and re-engagement in the spring. So we have already a pretty significant amount of awarding and application process that happens every spring. So we didn't want to add another significant project to that just because the scale could be really challenging. It also allows us, if folks apply in round one and maybe round two and they don't get funding, maybe their project is not appropriate, we have workforce readiness grants and re-engagement grants coming in another funding opportunity in the spring. So it also allows us to try to direct folks to future opportunities if there's a better fit. And then, yeah, I mean, I think it's also trying to figure out like the right time where we're not running into, the holidays can be a challenge, then we'll be in the legislative session, then we'll be doing our RFA processes, which is a really massive process. So it just felt like the best thing to do was to try to get that done. And but it felt like we should have 2 rounds rather than just one, because we do think that in moving really quickly, we might get feedback or learn things that cause us to make adjustments for the second round. But we're going to try to figure out a way, if someone applies for the first round and is funded and is interested in continuing funding for the next biennium, we're going to try to limit how much extra work they have to do to apply a second time. We're looking at, one possibility is the option to extend an agreement, but there are some complexities with that. The other option would be to say, like, you've already answered these questions, so if you were interested, there's a simplified application process to receive a second grant. So this, part of it is, it's a little bit unprecedented. The hardest thing is that it's unusual to get a large amount of money in the middle of the biennium. It's the same issue we had with re-engagement. We love to get new funding and put it out to the community, but that's a bit of a process. And we also have to work with other agencies that have timelines that aren't always compatible around things like, whether it's Department of Administrative Services, Department of Justice, ODE procurement, we're also in a bit of a bottleneck with everyone else. So there's a few different reasons for the timing, but we've tried to find the best solution.
And you answered one of my questions. And then what about the folks who did not receive grant funding in the first round? Is there a way to simplify the process for them as well for the second round?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different solutions there. I think that the technical assistance piece that we've started to use with like re-engagement, where we try to help folks who may not be at the point yet where we can fund them, but could use some capacity building. Are there ways we could support that? We do have a lot of flexibility around how we might do that. I will just say quickly that the Higher Education Coordinating Committee, who has a large amount of funding, their whole first round is just capacity building. They're going to do capacity building grants now to help folks be ready to apply for service delivery grants in 2023. So we're going to look at that as well. I'm trying to get a hold of, they're still working on their application, but I think there might be lessons from that model too.
Thanks, Gord. Thanks.
Okay, I'll try to move very quickly so we can get on to the next topic. So next slide, please. We have one legislative concept. Legislative concept is our proposal for a bill to be taken up in the legislative session next spring. It is to expand the definition or the description of the Youth Development Division, our roles and responsibilities in statute. We also want to update language around the YDC and YDD purpose and approach, shift language away from gang prevention to broader youth violence prevention. There are just a lot of ways that we think we can improve the language that was written now almost or sometimes over 10 years ago to better align with our current mission and vision and values, to clarify some of the roles and responsibilities. That LC is now with the, next slide, please. The governor's office approved it. It's now in this next stage, which is the legislative council. The attorneys over at the legislature someone is going to draft the bill language. We did provide proposed language, but we will see what we get back from them. And then once we have that, we will come back to the council for input. We will also have opportunity for folks from the community to give us feedback. This is really, I would say it's a technical fix bill. The goal is just to better align with the reality of the division being a functional agency that does a lot of work, some directed by the council, but some directed by the youth development director, and some directed now by statute. As with Future Ready, it really tells the division to go forth and make grants. And so it's a really different thing emerging in terms of the division being called out in legislation to do work. Compliance monitoring is another example of this. So we want to have clarity around that. And then assuming everything goes well, it goes to the legislative process next February. But one of the things that is a major wildcard for all legislation is that we will have a new governor. And so, one question is, will the governor be sponsoring our bill? Will it move forward? Will it have support? That isn't something we'll be able to know until early next year, but we are going to move forward working on that. Next slide, please. We're working on our budget. We are seeking a new prevention and justice analyst position, as well as extending the Future Ready position I discussed earlier. Again, this goes through the governor's office, but the new governor will be the one submitting a recommended budget. And the Future Ready funding, the federal funds that we would have remaining, would be carried forward to next year. Next slide, please. I think that's it. I'm out of time, but maybe there's time for one or two questions if there are any. And I'll just say super quickly that Brian and I are both talking with the Educator Advancement Council about this earlier question from community engagement of how to support the youth advocates and workers in youth development programs, and whether there's some way to collaborate with EAC, which is generally focused on educator development, building an educator workforce. We've started the conversation about what does it look like to also build and support the youth development workforce. I'm going to be meeting again with the person working on the legislation this week. So nothing to report there, but just one other piece of legislation that could emerge, something that might be supporting these organizations around this issue.
Thank you, Cord. And Anya and Molly, I'm sorry, we were running a little behind, but if you both would not mind beginning the conversation around the State Advisory Group and Juvenile Justice Committee update, we'd appreciate it. We'll have 30 minutes for that. So, okay.
Okay, well, thank you to Biddy, and good morning, everyone. Sorry for being tardy. I'm on vacation, and the vacation plans kind of change when you're in California, especially if you decide to go to Palm Springs in summer. I do not recommend it to anyone. We literally had to escape yesterday because it's I think it's about 108 today. It's going to be 115 tomorrow and 117 on Saturday. Like, do not go there. As much as I love Palm Springs, that's not a place. So I'm hiding out in Irvine, which is not bad, but I'm in my son's little apartment. So I had to kick the kids out to the pool. Don't worry, they're okay. But anyway, and it's also, there's like landscaping happening outside. So forgive the noise. It just not the best setup. But we have a very important agenda item today, and that I will ask the members of the Juvenile Justice Committee and hopefully Molly to take over from me, but I will just make an introduction to say, as a state advisory group, which you are, a state advisory group, you're responsible for advising on the issues of juvenile justice and helping the YDD to administer the federal funds for delinquency prevention and juvenile justice. Within that funding, racial and ethnic disparities reduction is one of the core protections of the Act. And for the YDD, over a number of years, we've used the strategy of introducing racial and ethnic disparity reduction to our county partners as well as tribes through the JCP funding. That's how question 6 became part of the juvenile crime prevention planning. And there were some areas that needed improvement for some of our applicants, or actually the grantees. Where I know the counties don't like the word grantees, our partners in counties. So with that, Sanjay led that work. My apologies, that was not meant I was just trying to like talk over the background noise, and I'm not making any sense. Forgive me for that. I just escaped the heat, maybe I had a heat stroke yesterday. Anyway, so the question 6 was regarding cultural strategies that counties were proposing to implement to address disparities within the systems. Sanji led that work, and Sanji left, but before she left, she created, with some help from other YDD staff, a set of questions that helped guide this resubmission of question 6. And the feedback that we've received from folks was that was a very helpful document that was shared with communities. So in that document, there were really 3 sections, 3 components that went into the scoring and the grading of the resubmitted plans. The first component was people were expected to identify and analyze racial and ethnic disparities in local data. And we did, with the help of the news authority, provide a training on how to use RED data that is available through Oregon News Authority. And Christina will probably kick me here because I know I'm forgetting the name of the committee that guides what JAGES does. The steering committee, right?
That's the JAGES steering committee, which is made up of 8 voting members from the counties and the county juvenile departments and the Oregon Youth Authority.
Thank you, Christina. I knew I could count on you to get it right. And the second component was the description of cultural strategies. And the third was people were asked to explain how you're intending to achieve an inclusive organization. So those were 3 areas, and there were some guiding questions added to them. Each component had a maximum score of 3. So the maximum score that anybody could have gotten was 9. 7 to 8 was a satisfactory scoring. So that said, the Juvenile Justice Committee members, most of them are here today, well, thank you for being here, were assigned a set of counties, and they did the scoring. They reviewed the plan, the question 6 resubmission. They entered their scores, and at the last Monday, actually this Monday, still this week, time flies when you're on vacation. We had a meeting, the Juvenile Justice Committee met. They reviewed the scoring and had a conversation. And Christina, I'll just have to say, your submission was the most thorough, the most thoughtful I've ever seen. You just deserve a round of applause. I mean it, seriously, applaud Christina. And so Molly, I'm gonna turn it on to you now, because if you don't mind sharing what the committee decided and what recommendations you were planning on making to this group.
Thank you, Anya. Chair Lewis, the committee met on Monday and went through all of this. We did a smart sheet and we had a robust discussion, and really, Christina, Alice did a beautiful job representing your email, and thank you so much for going through that. And we would like to recommend to the Youth Development Council that all of the counties resubmitted answers to question number 6, but beyond their answers, I really want to just share with the council how many of the counties just engaged in the conversation, both with Sonji before she left, but also just internally and with Anya, to really think through how question number 6 was meant to be kind of engaging and awareness building and really kind of looking at their systems. And I think as the council members have done their tour across the state, I think they have experienced some of that similar intensity and conversation about really digging into equity and conversations around what does that mean for our services. So the committee does not officially vote, but the recommendation is to the YEC to consider these for approval. Anya, was that a fair recap of our meeting?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Molly.
And as chair, I can make that motion when it's appropriate. Is that correct? And Chair Lewis, would you like me to make that motion so we can get into the discussion topic?
Indeed. Yeah.
So as chair of the Juvenile Justice Subcommittee, I would like to bring forward and make the motion to approve the juvenile justice prevention plans submitted by the counties in total. That's what I'd like to do.
Can we get a second of that motion? Celeste?
I second it, yes.
And so can we move the question to a vote?
I think there's a question from Commissioner Ozero that you should take.
Oh,
I see your hand.
I'm sorry, I did not see it.
No, it's all good, Tabitha. You're good.
Thank you. So I'm assuming from this description that all of the counties that resubmitted their information on question 6 did receive a satisfactory?
That is correct.
Okay, that was the implicit assumption. And I wanted to just make a brief comment from my perspective as a county commissioner and on the YDC and engaging with our juvenile department. I read the submission that they were planning to submit, and I have to say it would not have, I don't know if it would have passed muster. And I really had to work with them to describe what it is that they actually do, because they were way too literal in terms of answering the questions and way too narrow in scope. And they were, I think they have a habit of looking at dollars in a very narrow way. So they were looking only at those the juvenile justice prevention plan dollars and not at what we do as a program and as a county that's culturally specific and providing broader services to address racial and ethnic disparities. And so I think some of what's going on is just trying to figure out what we really are asking and trying to describe practice rather than how these grant dollars in this particular little box are being used.
Commissioner Ozero, I think that you find juvenile justice people to be relatively literal. And I think that was one of the pieces that I have super appreciated across the stories that I have heard from Brian and Bill and Paul as they've gone across the state, and I'm sure Molly's experienced this too, is what's really happening in the big picture. These dollars that we have are a very teeny tiny piece of it. And I think it is just how so I actually think we're setting a stage for the counties to tell a story, and we haven't done that in the past. So yeah, that was great.
I see Christina has her hand up as well.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to comment that I know that many times there's a lot of concerns amongst the juvenile department directors related to being different groups we engage with or state agencies being very valley focused, metro focused. And I just want to say that having the opportunity to review these resubmissions that I was assigned to, many of which happen to be frontier counties, members of the Eastern and Central Oregon areas, I was blown away. There were a couple that I read through, not to get corny, I'm glad my camera's off, but I was just so moved by the hands-on work that was going on individually with kids and partnering in the community. Brian, I know you know this person, Clinton Lacey. We've had a chance to hear him speak at different things. He used to be the director of youth services for Washington, D.C. He's since left and started a credible messenger organization that's gone national. He often speaks about the need to have juvenile justice work be centered on love. And I saw that love of these young people, love of these families, love of their communities, and just really truly inspirational work that's going on. There were 3 that I reviewed that I gave them a rating of exceptional. And anyone who knows me, Brian, you and I used to work together. I have never been accused of being an easy grader. So see, now he's laughing. So I just really, this was a lot of work, but I felt like it was a gift because it really, what you just said, Zan, made me think about this isn't just pockets of money, and thinking holistically across the county and how there's these intersections and collaborations, and that word gets overused a lot, but just the innovation and that love that I could feel emanating from a couple of these, several of these actually, and even some of the components of the ones that I gave a satisfactory rating to. I was like, I've been accused because of my career path maybe of being, metro-centric, but this really helped me understand what's going on in many smaller counties that is really admirable and really inspiring work. And we've got to find a way to fund and support, and it's not always just money, but to support this amazing work that's going on, because there is no lack of will or care that I was seeing in the ones that I got to review. It was oozing out. And anyway, I just wanted to share that with everybody, because as Molly just said, I think this gives us a foundation to the next go round when we're designing what we're going to ask people to submit. I think this has been a real eye-opening experience, and I'm really excited because I think we're moving in a positive direction, and we will be able to get much more meaningful plans that tell these stories as we go forward. So I know it's been a lot of work. It's been a long road. It's been a lot of conversation. Hasn't always been without conflict in the last year, but I think that at the end of the day, we're coming out much better for all of this. So anyway, I just wanted to share my thoughts about that.
Okay, thank you so much. So if we don't have another question, I'm wondering if we can move this vote forward to an official capacity. Melissa, did you want to weigh anything in? Or?
Yes, thanks to BD. I'm ready to take a roll call vote. Zan Ojero.
Aye.
Sorry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay. Eric Cardella.
Aye.
Parasa Chenrami.
Aye.
Janine Hartley.
Aye.
Celeste Jansen.
Aye.
Robin Johnson, absent. Andy Leonard.
Aye.
Tabidi Lewis.
Aye.
Adrian Livingston.
Aye.
Erica McAlpin. Christina McMahon.
Aye.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Aye.
Jeff Parker.
Jeff Parker votes aye.
Molly Rogers.
Molly Rogers votes aye.
Diana Rojas.
Aye.
Andy Santana May. Karen Spencer. Liz Thorne. Koi Vu. Kiwi Wilson. All right, that is the end. I will provide a tally in the chat. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your vote. And I just wanted to thank the Juvenile Justice Committee members one more time and endless times. Thank you so much for your hard work and dedication. And it took quite a bit of, I know we put Christina on the spot, but everyone, every single member of the committee made an exceptional work, reviewing and scoring and, you know, sharing their thoughts with everyone. Now, I know we're behind time, but do we have a few more minutes to talk about our state advisory group thing? Melissa is not.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to mention a couple of things. So as I stated, going back to the federal Title II funding, a new solicitation has just been released for fiscal year 22. Of course, the application is due within a month. So we will be working on that. Lindsay has been working on updating our compliance monitoring manual. We're getting some technical assistance from the Center for Coordinated Assistance to States. We will be able to submit the revised manual, and that revised manual is what's holding us from receiving fiscal year 21 funding. So like we will be applying for 22 while we're still waiting for the 21. So that work is happening. And we will have an update for all of you in September on where we are with that. And the Juvenile Justice Committee will hear about all this work in August at the August meeting. And I don't know, Brian, Molly, would you like to say a few words about the Coalition for Juvenile Justice conference that we attended? Because that's the national policy group.
Yeah, I'm happy to mention a thing. Molly Cord was also in attendance, as was Lindsay and Paul and Anya. I note that Sam has put in the chat that as a part of Anya's responsibilities and something that was made official at the Coalition for Juvenile Justice conference was that Anya was reelected, right, Anya, because you've been in this role before, reelected as the National Juvenile Justice Specialist. And so Anya has served in this function before, and I want to not undersell or kind of underestimate like the fact that in Oregon we have somebody serving in this capacity is a testament to Anya, and is a wonderful position for us as a state advisory group to have her involved with our team. So congratulations, Anya. Thank you for your great work.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, great job. And I know, again, we're a little behind schedules here. So we were at the conference in Washington, D.C. It was great. As we said, with these grantee visits and other outreach we've been doing, like, to be in person, it's like this mind-blowing, like, wait, am I actually, this is actually happening? We see each other and we can shake hands or hug or just whatever in between. Like it still feels, makes me kind of excited and giddy, and also still feels odd that it's been so long. We visited with staff from Oregon's federal delegation from 5 different offices. I think in the executive committee I detailed who we met with, but I'll just say that I think there are 6 folks we met with. We didn't meet with the Fazio's office, but Bentz, Schrader, Merkley, Bonamici, Blumenauer, maybe I'm missing one more. We didn't meet with the actual electeds, but we met with their staff, and we had really dynamic and interesting conversations with all of them. It was great to have Molly along, because as staff and state employees, we can't advocate for anything. We were just informing and educating, but Molly was able to be there to make clear that we wanted to our federal delegation members to support the reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which is something that Oregon's delegation has been behind in a bipartisan way in the past, and then just letting them know that we've got these federal funds that are supporting our future ready work. So we're thankful for that and excited about how we're implementing. And there's some other policy work around use of federal Medicaid dollars to support services for, in particular, for young people who are in different correctional facilities, right? There's actually at the state, at the federal level, if you are incarcerated, whether an adult or a juvenile, you are not allowed to access Medicaid dollars, but there is the opportunity to apply for a waiver of that to allow for Medicaid dollars to flow to folks who are incarcerated. And so we're advocating for that, or where OHA is actually, the Oregon Health Authority folks are advocating for that, but it's an issue that is important for our juvenile justice work in the state. Molly, anything to add, or I turn it to you?
No, it was great to be in person. It was great to spend time with YDD staff. And I just really encourage anybody on the Youth Development Council to kind of look at some of the CJJ work. The Youth Summit is coming up, and so it has a virtual option to it, and it's definitely meant for youth to kind of engage their voices and have their voices heard, but there's an option for adults to kind of listen. And then the RED, Racial and Equity Disparities conference is in November in Kentucky. And CJJ pulls together really nice conferences. If you have the opportunity to participate in one, just really encourage. The main focus was family and youth engagement, which is what we're talking about so often at the Youth Development Council. And so we were able to share ideas for ourselves. And then we were able to celebrate some of the things we do really well, and to look to our north in Washington and a couple of counties in Washington that are just knocking it out of the park when it comes to youth and family engagement. So it was a good conference. Very proud of the state of Oregon and our involvement, and proud of Anya, and encourage the November conference. Thanks.
Okay. So that's a nice segue. Thank you, Molly and Anya. To segue into committee reports, so perhaps if our committee chairs, Marcella and Diana and Erica could, and Abe, give us a sense of what's happening with the different committees. So should we move through executive and juvenile justice and policy, rules and research and equity disparity?
Yeah, maybe since the first one is the executive committee, I can just mention to BD, with Robin gone, obviously you're here facilitating, so I appreciate that. We did meet as an executive committee. I can't remember, it was probably a couple of weeks ago. The chairs of the different committees are engaged in that, and our past chair, Celeste, is also part of that committee, as is Karen too, who's chaired the strategic planning committee. So that committee met. We tend to use that to kind of preview the agenda for today's meeting, and then just kind of get some guidance and insight on other matters. One of the issues that was brought up in that was ballot measure 110. And so I have a little information about that that I'll share as a part of my director's report. But that, as far as I'm concerned, is the executive committee report out. Others who are there, please weigh in or share any thoughts or questions.
I would just point out that we did have a very robust discussion about the land acknowledgement during that executive committee report that Brian already referred to earlier in the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. How about juvenile justice? Is there an additional comment? Okay. Youth.
I speak a little bit. And feel free to jump in, Marcella. But we just met was earlier in the week, just very briefly, just kind of touch base to get back the youth committee work rolling again. Taneja was on the call as well, and discussing, when we can meet again and start developing an agenda for the next youth committee meeting.
Yeah, I think the important thing to highlight is that we need to do some serious recruiting right now. So if you have youth that you want to refer to us, please do that.
Thank you both. What about policy, rules, and research?
I'm trying to track down the notes from the meeting, and we have so many different meetings that have happened in the last 2 weeks and so many different notes that it hasn't, unfortunately, made it to my site yet. But I think, oh, here we go. This might be it. Well, I'll just try to go from memory.
You want us to pivot forward and come back to you, Cord, or?
I think I can hopefully provide my recollection, and then folks who were in attendance at the meeting last week may be able to add to it. But essentially, we brought the question to the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee of what folks on the committee want to do on the committee. Trying to really hone in on what our the charter or purpose of the committee would be. We've talked about in the prior meeting, that there's legislative work to be done. We have administrative rules that sometimes have to be reviewed, broader policy discussion. There are specific policy issues that we could focus on or have work groups to focus on. Also data, there's a lot there in terms of the data that we collect, how we use data to drive our policy work. It was a good discussion. We did not arrive at a final decision, but did kind of come up with some ideas for how we might try to hone in on that a little bit more. And one thing that we've recognized is that there's a need just for the understanding of the life cycle of things like legislation. Our grant cycle and our legislative cycle are actually things that require a lot of foresight to prepare for. We're at this point, could begin thinking about the 2025 legislative session and what kinds of things we'd like to put forward there. We also talked about the possibility of legislative advocacy being something that committee might help to coordinate. There's been some interest from the council in ways to get involved and advocate for things, and some action around that, and how we might as a committee support that work or help to coordinate those efforts is another topic. So we're just continuing to work together to try to really define policy, rules, and research is very broad, but we also want to really think about where we could have the most impact given the time we have to devote to the work. And folks that were there at the meeting, if you want to add your thoughts, please do. Or if it's sufficient, I'll pass it on. I see a thumbs up, so I'll take it.
Okay. And equity and disparity.
Great. I can give that update. So we had our second Equity and Disparity Committee meeting at the end of May. We settled upon a purpose statement. So we presented a couple options to the committee, and the committee agreed upon one solid purpose statement for the work and how we're going to move that work forward. Next, we're actually going to be working on an equity statement and doing something similar with that. We also discussed the land acknowledgement, and I think we'll have some work happening on that moving forward. And then finally, we looked at our strategic plan and where the strategic plan mentions equity. And one of the main things in the strategic plan was perhaps developing an equity lens that we use for YDD and for grant making and just overall YDD business. So I think next steps will be thinking about how we develop an equity lens for the committee and the division. And that's it. Anybody else who was there, please feel free to add anything.
Jared,
Okay.
real quick, Jared, maybe you said this, I was responding to things in the chat and so on. I think one of the things that, and again, if you said this, Jared, my apologies, that was discussed in our breakout room was the land acknowledgement. So I think the Equity and Disparity Committee can talk about that piece too.
Yes. Yep, we mentioned that, and that'll be work moving forward that we can talk about there.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, we've gotten ahead of ourselves, right? But that is due to some very gracious presenters helping to catch us back up. And so if it's 11 right now, if there's anything that we flashed through that someone wanted to just say, hey, I had another question, or I'd like to, sort of, broach something. I would like to just open the floor for, 5 minutes, which would still keep us ahead of our schedule if someone wanted to, before we move into the strategic plan update discussion, if someone wanted to just say, well, yeah, I do want to circle back, and or I had another question about something. Please raise your hand, or just if you speak first, then we will see that as being hand raised as well. Okay. Yeah, sure. We can take a 5-minute break. How about that before we go, if that's okay with people? We can take a 5-minute break, give Cord a chance to find whatever he needs, or take a deep breath, take a drink of water. You've been chatting quite a bit, and we cut the last break short. So I'll shut up, and so we can actually have a break, and let's come back at 5:06. Okay. All right. And Cord, you'll have the 20 minutes, but why don't we just start now? Yeah.
All right, let's roll with it. Thanks. This is Cord Bucher again with YDD. Give you an update on where we are at with the strategic plan. Next slide, please. Just recognizing a few things that we accomplished in that work. One is that we updated the agency and council's mission, vision, and values, which I'll just share here on the screen, let you all read for a second. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going back into the contents of the strategic plan. We do still have that available for you to access. It's in the same location we previously shared, and can share that again. But just really briefly, the strategic plan had 3 overarching goals that I've put here on this slide: systems alignment and transformation, youth voice and resilience, and community capacity and justice. And all the different strategies that we identified in developing the plan really fit into these 3 areas of focus. There are, of course, some strategies, some actions that overlap or could impact 2 or even all 3 of these. But these were really the overarching themes of the strategic plan. And I'm going to go ahead and ask for the next slide. And I want to call out a few of the things that we have achieved since we put that plan together last spring. The 2021-23 RFA process was actually like I think the site of a lot of the implementation of ideas that came out of that plan. Certainly the clarification of the council and division roles around grant processes and awarding. I think that was a big accomplishment. Council committee redesign. You just heard from committees that did not exist prior to the strategic plan, and the new committees were really established to reflect priorities that emerged in that plan. Interagency partnership was a significant theme, and in particular, partnership with HEC around youth workforce development and Future Ready is bigger and bolder than anything we could have envisioned in terms of what that collaboration might look like. Removing the waiver of sovereign immunity requirement from our grants to tribal nations was, I think, a significant success in terms of us trying to honor sovereignty and our relationship with the tribes. We did significant new member recruitment. That's continuing, but that included new youth council members as well as a new chair. We did create new branding and identity. You can see it on these slides. Youth programs, youth voices were elevated by the governor as part of Future Ready. We were able to bring to fore the stories of a number of young people in YDD programs. And grantee convening, bringing our grantees together to talk about how they work, how they can collaborate more, how we can do better work by them. In re-engagement, we've begun convening our grantees, and that's really a feature of our re-engagement system programming. Those are just some of the highlights I wanted to share first in terms of things that came out of the plan that we've done over the last year. Next slide, please. A few things that are in progress. So, I mean, the rebranding, even though we've got this logo up here, we're still working on how to deploy really this Youth Development Oregon identity, talking about the council and division as one unified body. Comprehensive theory of action was another goal identified that we've begun working in earnest on with NPC research, really trying to develop that. Community engagement process that you heard about earlier is really, really embodies a few different aspects, a few different strategies and actions in the plan, with the goal of renewing our community investment model to be more responsive to the folks doing the work. The YDD policy and legislative agenda for 2023, you heard a little bit about that a while ago. Both our legislative concept, potential legislation, and our goal of sustaining the increased scope of grant making we're doing. Aligning work to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile crime prevention grants. We've also talked a little bit about that today. And then just generally participating more in policy development implementation across state initiatives. So being involved in Measure 110 work, the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission, which now there's legislation that specifically names us as a partner to that work. We've begun having conversations with different folks at the Oregon Health Authority. So just trying to be at more policy tables with other state agency partners. All those are things that we've begun. I don't think we've reached a point where we can say we are done with this, and maybe this will all be ongoing work, but just wanted to name these as some strategies and actions in progress. So the next slide is what I'm hoping to have some discussion with the council about today. We wanted to share some of the places where we have strategies and actions that just have not yet gained momentum, have potentially even become things that are not urgent priorities or could perhaps need to look different to really achieve the goals that the overarching goals of the strategic plan. But we felt for accountability purposes, it would be good to share some of these things just so you know what we have from the plan that has not yet started moving. And what we want to do, we have a set of questions for the council, but I'll share a few of these and talk about what they are, what they mean. And then we want to reflect on some of these strategies and actions with these questions that'll come in a future slide. So around our youth engagement work, there was a desire for a youth engagement plan. We are now reconvening the youth committee with a new staff liaison, and that committee is getting reestablished, but that is work that we still want to do. Assessing and supporting work around the sense of belonging, collaborating with Early Learning Division, or soon the Department of Early Learning and Care, to improve access to childcare for young parents in our programs. There was a notion of a racial ethnic disparities white paper that we might seek to have done. The YDD, YDC equity statement and decision-making tool that was identified. I heard Jared mention that as possible work for the equity committee, so that could be a place that it lives. Parent voice on the council and in different ways that the council and division work. Grant making to support creativity, culture, traditions, and relationship to nature. Next slide, please. Further exploring other funding sources that we could bring to bear on our work. Grants to build capacity, grants focused on places and spaces where work is not being done. That was really focused on improving or access to services within confinement spaces. Longer term grant funding cycles, looking at the community schools program and whether that could be revamped or expanded, and a framework for more connectivity between the council, agency, and youth and communities. So how do we do more around evaluation and feedback from the folks that we fund and work with? These were all things that were in the plan. They are still there, but we wanted to sort of just share this stuff and say, what strategies and actions here do we want to put some additional push behind? What needs increased support and momentum? What seems most important here for us to really get going on to the council? Are there things that now don't seem as critical or perhaps accomplished elsewhere in our work? Are there things that should look different? Are there strategies and actions emerging that could be added that might help drive at these overarching goals that we have? So I wanted to just provide an opportunity for the council to just reflect on this. I know we don't have a whole lot of time for discussion, but we want to just put this back in front of you, let you know we're making progress, but there are places where we want to make sure that we know what your priorities are before we continue pushing on them. And so with that, I'll pause, and if it's helpful, we could go back to either of the last two slides and some of the projects that are on hold right now, just so folks can see the list.
Could you? Yeah.
And maybe Cord or Melissa, you could I appreciate that it was 2 slides. I got, for a second, I got a little nervous. I'm like, is this gonna be like 3 or 4 slides long? I was like, oh my. But Cord, maybe you could copy and paste the list into the chat, and then we can see it, in one, because I know it's on 2 slides.
I will do that now.
This is Melissa. Thanks for doing that, Cord. I'm not sure I can do that and present at the same time. And you mentioned not having, too much time, but we've got a good 15 minutes, I think, for discussion. I also can't remember if there's much left in the slideshow, Cord. So
there's just one more slide, and since I'm pasting these in, you could go to the last slide where I don't know that these are the right next steps, but I wanted to provide what I think we could do in terms of how to look at this and move forward. I think that the place where we're at now is really this initial conversation for the council, but is this a conversation to happen within committees? Sorry, the next slide after this, Melissa. Is this committee work? Is there a work group around the strategic plan that we should consider? And then, as that happens, then, does the staff then come back with some proposed ways to change, revise, or revitalize some of these actions, and then ultimately come out with updated priorities and an action plan for the next program year? That's a possible approach. And the chat now has the full list of things. And I see, Zan, you've got your hand up, so I'll call on you.
Thank you, Cord. Zan Ojro, and I know that I pipe up often, so I'll keep it short. But I would say that my first reaction is that we really do need to put emphasis behind a youth engagement plan. That is a high priority. Equity tool, equity lens, and the evaluation and feedback. Those are would strike me as some of the highest priorities. The other things that I'm very interested in, however, are the notion of the new places and spaces and the focus on traditions, culture, and nature in our work. And while those are of great interest, they're not as kind of structural and strategic, perhaps, in the near term. So that's my first reaction, just to get the ball rolling.
Thank you.
Looks like Celeste has a point, or yeah, go Celeste.
I've done some work with the Oregon outdoor school system. So my thinking on the grant making related to traditions, creativity, culture, and relationships with nature is that we would just want to do any work in that area in partnership with what they're already doing. And I think they're doing some really deep work on thinking about racial equity within the outdoor school system and how to make sure outdoor school is comfortable and safe for all. But I do have wonderings about what it looks like in other ways other than just outdoor schools. So that was interesting to see on it and just remember that came up. I really agree that an equity decision-making tool would be really nice. And I'm curious too, the racial and ethnic disparities white paper, I think could be really powerful just in saying what we see and where we want to go. So both of those feel like good things for the council to take on. I really believe in having measurement. There's this whole thing in measurement with leading indicators and lagging indicators. And lagging indicators are really easy to measure, and they don't tell you much except what happened in the past. And leading indicators are a lot harder to measure, but they're way better at telling you how to make adjustments. And so they're really good if we can find ways, like with sense of belonging, to measure things. It tells us, it tells our partners what's going well and what's not going well, instead of 5 years later saying, well, that student didn't graduate. It captures information way sooner. So I like that idea, and I don't want to just stop at sense of belonging. I really believe in sense of belonging as being foundational, but ways that we can figure out what's working and what's not working, not at the very end, but like while it's happening, I think is really promising. I think that all of these ideas are really great. And always there's a question of priorities. So, no answers there, but I just feel like, yep, these are all great. On the programmatic side, one last thing, we ask programs to do a lot in 2 years. And if you think about how long it takes to start up, to staff, to develop things, to serve, and then to measure, I know there's some limitations in the biennium funding, but if we could do some form of a longer commitment, a longer promise, a longer something, that could really be wonderful for both program design, for youth being served, for stability within a nonprofit. So all interesting. I think there's a lot of great ideas here.
Thank you, Celeste. Zan, your hand is up. Is it up again, or is it just up from earlier?
I'm sorry, it's up from earlier.
I
did want to say that I want to echo Celeste's note of congratulations as to how much we have gotten done, and we didn't really celebrate that before we dived into what we haven't done. So, acknowledgements.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that this, for me, I often am thinking more about what I haven't done than what I have, and we've in some of the past updates we've tried to highlight things we've accomplished, but it feels like this is a point where we want to think about some of these things maybe didn't happen for a good reason. We've had staffing changes. There are other just emerging things that have really absorbed us. I mean, Future Ready is really an accomplishment of one of the actions that we kind of had in passing that has become a huge undertaking for us. So I think the scale of these things can also really differ. Some projects are really significant. Even among these that aren't done, I mean, there are pieces here that might actually be easier to accomplish. For folks that have seen the plan, maybe some who it's still new to, things you're seeing here, things we've talked about today, is there stuff that you see as missing? Are there things that you just haven't heard in discussion, but knowing, again, the broad strokes goals that we have around youth voice and resilience, community capacity and justice, systems alignment, transformation. Is there anything that you think we should, you would change about these or add? That's kind of a huge question to just throw out there too. I think I'm kind of thinking about, like, how do we keep this conversation going in a way that sort of fits within both the time we have today, but also keeps the work flowing. I do think that, I forgot in listing all the possible things for the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee. Strategic Plan Stewardship was yet another place where we saw some work. So that committee, I think this is a place where that could be discussed. Rafi, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll take the invitation of the super new person perspective, but I guess I'm just hearing I was hearing a little bit more today, just that the youth committee is in a place where they're really wanting to recruit and need to bring on more youth voice. just the comments around being a state advisory group, needing to have 20% youth representation. So I guess I would just say, from a very newbie perspective, it seems like maybe a youth engagement plan. I don't know what that includes, but really looking at the way that YDC engages youth and creates meaningful participation and representation for them here on this council feels like a priority. And what that looks like, and like making it a really enjoyable, meaningful experience for youth to be a part of that. Yeah, just my thoughts.
I appreciate that. I saw Maricela give a thumbs up to that thought. You know, I think one of the things that, you know, at least in my mind around a youth engagement plan is that I, as a non-youth, am not the person to define either what that looks like or what that should entail. But I like the point you made that we want being a youth council member to be a rewarding, enjoyable experience. There are actually a few things also named in the strategic plan around like what we hope for younger council members to get out of this experience that were kind of brought up in the development of the plan. So yeah, I appreciate that. It sounds like that is emerging as one where we really want, where it sounds like there's some consensus among folks here that the youth engagement plan and just how we really amplify youth presence and involvement in council work is something we should focus on. So I appreciate that and have made note of that. I know we may be getting near the end of the time. We didn't leave a whole lot of time for this, but we just wanted to let folks know where we were at, that we're still working on this. I see an idea in the chat from Zan about conducting a survey of the council members to allow some reflection, set a stage for the next discussion. And I see, Karen, you've got a comment as well, so please go ahead.
I know you've got a whole like spreadsheet and all of that. I'm wondering, as we think about the strategic plan and stewarding that, whether some form of dashboard needs to be created. And I'm happy to help you with that as well, Cord.
Thank you. Yeah, we have, what we've been using to track a lot of these is a smart sheet that we created where every different action from the plan exists, has assigned staff and timelines, many of which have just been blown right through, like a football team running through the paper banner. We were way past when some of these things we thought would happen, but that again, there's lots of good reasons for that. But I think that we could look at that. You know, Karen, I know I have some follow up with you from the Policy Rules Research Committee, and always very appreciative of your willingness to help us develop tools and approaches for this stuff. So that might just be something to tack on to that next conversation that we need to have.
And what I'm envisioning is kind of taking that work that you've already done and that you're tracking and bringing it up just like a couple of levels so that it's something that the board can see and view. And it's less about, you know, meeting specific deadlines, unless that deadline happens to be very important for, let's say, statutory reasons or something like that, and more about having a sense of where are we making progress, where has there been a completion, and where is there something that the board needs to either support or help or advise on. So bringing it up a couple of notches.
That makes sense.
And I hope when we talk, you remember that, because I sometimes have these ideas and then I completely forget what I was talking about. So.
No, I think a good point got raised at that committee meeting that there's work here that really is just the work of the division and the staff. And I think that it's on the division folks to really think about like where we would like help from the council, or where you know, there's a real clear role for the council to play in supporting moving something forward. And I think, you know, we can definitely try to be smart about how we occupy everyone's time here. But we also want to update you on what we're doing and show that we are responsive to the guidance that you've given us through this great plan.
Or just in the last minute here, I've just appreciated hearing people's questions and thoughts. Love the survey idea. That might be a way to get some more reflection, right, post meeting, since we haven't had a ton of time just two or three real quick things. One, we do have, I was about to write this in the chat, but we have this thing, we internally refer to it as the placemat, but it's kind of it's a visual, it's a dashboard of sorts that reports on some of these, the states, the mission, vision, and values, and has the goals. And we shared that in advance of the last meeting. I don't know, Cord, I don't think we've updated it for this meeting, but maybe Karen, Cord, like maybe we can share that with you and then figure out if there are ways that either serves the purpose of what you're talking about, Karen, or perhaps it doesn't. But adding this, this presentation and the question about what we haven't advanced came out of the executive committee, and I think it's, Cord, I think it's fantastic, and the whole council, I appreciate that we've been able to kind of see the list. I would say real quickly too, I think the community engagement work has began to serves a purpose around kind of a continuous feedback loop. So let's not forget that in the grantee site visits that we're doing and are committed to do going forward, how often is it? Once every 2 years, or I don't know like exactly what it will look like, but we are in relationship with those grantees, and that is providing us great real-time feedback. So I think there's a connection between that community engagement work and one of the strategies that I saw, or actions that I saw on the list. And then the work on the theory of action, theory of change, like that work too is connected to Celeste's point and other people's points around that sensible, like identifying some of those, I don't know if I want to call them outcomes. Maybe they're outcomes, maybe they're measures. Like there's all the words that what one thing means, you know, they all mean similar things, but not necessarily the same thing. But having that kind of framework or logic model, I think will help us get to that place where we can measure and understand leading and or lagging indicators, Celeste. So I think the conversation we'll have over the next couple of months around that hopefully will be a place where we can tease some of that out and or maybe decide, oh, this is helpful, or maybe we need to do more. So there's a couple of things that I think are probably more, a long way of saying we're making progress. They may go by a different name, but they're things that are being advanced, and just appreciate that staff and council members and committees are all helping to push that stuff forward.
Well, if there are no more comments or questions, thank you, Cord. And actually, Brian, we segue right into you regarding the director's report. And then afterwards, we will have a little time to take any comments from the public comments. So we'll gauge to see what's happening once you're done.
Fantastic. I will try not to talk at you for too long. You've heard, I think, bits and pieces of things that I was planning on sharing. I also want to, and I know Melissa has reached out to those who are guests, and I don't think there's a desire for public comment, but Brian and Lacey and Alice, we all really appreciate your all being here and just kind of listening in 10, 12 minutes. If there's a comment or question that you have from a public comment standpoint, your opportunity is coming up shortly, but no pressure. But again, I see those names, and perhaps there are others that I'm missing, but we do appreciate your being here and listening in. And again, there'll be time here about 10, 12 minutes for any public comment. My director's report items are, one, just reiterating the community engagement piece. I am planning on engaging with Celeste, Robin, and Liz at a minimum. I may come to a couple of additional council members around this work on this kind of theory of action. We've got a group of staff who are also working at it as well, and we will bring that to the full council in the fall, in the September timeframe, but we've got a group of committed people working on that framework, and then that presentation. I have in my head, I want to check in with a couple of other council members, so you'll hear from me. I would encourage you, as we develop an agenda, which is going to take us some time, but once we get a better sense of what our community engagement, like meetings and listening sessions, looks like, we will let you know. But please, I don't know, just kind of keep in your mind that in the fall, we'd love to have you participating and attending some of those community engagement actual sessions, and then help us promote community engagement efforts. Many of you have helped gather people or suggested people we talk to, et cetera. We know, obviously, we're also talking to our grantees, and they're making recommendations and suggestions too. So that is just, if you have thoughts, feel free to let me know or Melissa know. We can pass information on to Paul and the grant manager team or others, but just appreciate your engagement and suggestions, ideas in the outreach that's happening this summer. And youth, I will say, like, one thing that, and Molly and I have talked about this, and other staff and I have talked about, as we get into that, as we move into the fall, I think being thoughtful about having youth participation, or maybe it's a separate youth, like a late afternoon youth related conversation and an evening community session. I don't know, there are different ways that we should think about and be creative and smart about engaging youth and families in those community engagement conversations. So it's also something, as we have another youth committee meeting, would be really excited to talk to our youth committee. And I'll also finally say this, like, we don't have to do we can't do everything. So this is an ongoing commitment. So if I know our youth committee has talked about like a youth summit and a youth gathering of some, that may be a really good opportunity to engage youth in a really intentional way. And if that is in the winter or in the spring, because we need to give ourselves some runway to figure it out, let's talk about that and figure it out, rather than trying to force something. That's my community engagement update. Future Ready Oregon, Court has provided some information about that. We've had regular meetings with the governor, updating her on kind of where things are. We've been meeting with partners and talking to partners, and then Court kind of laid out the timeline for the RFAs, the request for applications. So that's fantastic. Regarding ballot measure 110, I don't want to spend a ton of time here. I know Commissioner Osro, you asked about this. I will not claim to be an expert on ballot measure 110. I know, Molly, you've been a part of a work group. We had a staff member attending some of the meetings around that, but it was Sanji, it was great, but she left. So we have yet to put somebody back in the ballot measure 110 conversation. But just as a reminder to folks, this is related to the Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act that reduces the penalty for possessing small amounts of illegal drugs in Oregon. That was passed in the last legislative, well, it was actually a ballot measure, so it was passed by the public in the past. It involves that rather than people getting arrested, they get a citation. There's a fine, $100. There's a fine that can be assessed, but I believe there's options and ways to have that waived or reduced. Adults and youth have the option of completing a health assessment to avoid paying the fine, and that also can provide access to services. The ballot measure does require the formation of a grant program. So that's where I think this effort is at now in terms of awarding grants through the Addiction Recovery Centers and Oversight and Accountability Council. It's a very long name. That council is working on determining how grants will be funded and distributed. I think they've started to make some decisions, Zan, but I don't know that they
have made
have
grants. I think they're negotiating now at the DAS process.
Yeah, so that's happening, and again, others. But there's a $265 million, right, that's being brought to bear to support this ballot measure. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's money that's cannabis tax revenue. So a bunch of money is being poured into this drug treatment and addiction work, and then will be funneled through these grants that will go to these behavioral health resource networks at a local level. So there's probably more to learn. Maybe we can get somebody to talk to a committee or a council. I had meetings that I scheduled with somebody at OHA, and then person canceled them, but then I just called and we had a really good initial conversation. So I think there's more to learn there. But if I don't know, I'll stop there. That's the quick overview. But as YDD, YDC, I think there's opportunity for us to be engaged. And if there are specific information that y'all want us to know or share, or Molly, if you have, or Zan, if you have questions or comments, please weigh in. Nothing? No.
No, I think it would be great to have somebody from the council come to the YDC and engage in a robust conversation with the YDC on where the youth story is in the Drug Addiction and Recovery Act of 2020. I think you probably all know that I've been at the table and have been raising the youth voice piece. And if you don't, I have been.
Yeah, thank you.
But it still is a quiet voice. And so I think it would be incredibly interesting for some of them to come and talk with us and hear that the disparities and the war on drugs impacted youth in a very critical way. So yes, I can answer questions on it all day long, but I think it would be great if we actually had a council to council conversation.
Okay. All right. As I said, made an initial connection, and we know some folks on the council, like Dr. Reginald Richardson, who's with the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission, and we're connected there. So we'll work on that. And again, it's been a little tough sledding trying to get people pinned down there, but we'll work on it. I feel I just have a few minutes left. Thanks to Beatty for giving me a heads up. Positions, just know we're hiring. And yeah, Sam, thanks for your comments in the chat. We are hiring. We've actually got applications for an administrative specialist position to support our justice and prevention team. So we've narrowed down to a handful of candidates, and we'll be interviewing those. And we've got the racial and ethnic disparities coordinator position out public with the deadline, I think, a week or so out. Melissa, you can help remind me on the deadline or drop it in the chat. But Melissa sent some information out to the whole council. So if you want to spread the word about that position, because again, it's still open. It's still receiving applications. I put something on LinkedIn. Like, we just want to get the word out about that racial and ethnic disparities coordinator position to replace Sanji. I'll also mention on the community violence prevention front, I don't know if folks were aware of this, House Bill 4045, which was passed in this short session, is allocating some specific dollars to OHA, I think at a coordination level, the Oregon Health Authority, or maybe they're also, sorry, maybe in Cord to help me here, they may be giving grants with that, but 2.5 million of that is going to one of our grantees, POIC, and they're making grants to organizations across the state to do violence prevention work, gang related violence work. And there's a specific piece in that legislation where 1.5 million is going to a organization called Healing Hurt People, or a program. I think Healing Hurt People is a program of POIC, Portland Opportunities Industrialization Center, which also runs Rosemary Anderson High School. But so more money, 4.5 million, is my math right? But 4 million, roughly $4 million going out to do community violence prevention work. We just learned about this. So I've been in touch with the folks at POIC, Abe, Cord, we'll all kind of make sure we are, kind of connecting the dots. But I'll admit, we didn't really have this on our radar until fairly recently. So interesting and good. I think a good thing that there's resources going, and again, statewide resources around community violence prevention. But again, I won't claim to be an expert. I just know the kind of basic outline that I just shared, but we'll track it. Any questions on that or the positions? I know I have like 1 minute left. My other two quick things just to share. Oregon Business Council, they advocate for issues from the kind of private sector business community, but we're going to have a chance to go before I think they have a specific like policy committee. So Colt Gill from ODE, Oregon Department of Education, a representative from the Early Learning Council, and myself will be speaking to the Oregon Business Council folks. I think it's in the next week or two, just to talk about our work and talk about some of our priorities. I plan on talking about racial and ethnic disparities that persist in education, juvenile justice, education, child welfare, and health. I'll plan on talking about the disconnection from public education, particularly challenges post-COVID. So we can talk about re-engagement. We'll talk about community and violence, right? And violence prevention and taking that kind of root causes frame. Talk about how services are and programs are, being impacted at the rural community level. Things that we've heard in our community engagement and from our juvenile justice partners and others about how services they're facing some unique issues and barriers in terms of resources and capacity in rural communities and rural populations and vulnerable populations in those spaces. So we'll talk about that. So we'll have a seat at the table to have this conversation. I don't know exactly what will come out of it, but it will inform the Oregon Business Council and their policy direction. So I, kind of pushed my way into that meeting with some help from Colt Gill at ODE. And I think I'm going to end there because I know I'm like a minute over. Any questions, comment? Most of us are working remotely if you're interested in that. So that continues, but I've been in the office occasionally. Taviti.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And at this point, I would like to open the floor to for public comment. So if anyone has a public comment, we will just pause and listen and look to see if in fact there are comments from the public. So, and if there is, each person will get 3 minutes. So.
This is Melissa. I see that Alice Perry has raised her hand.
Okay.
Alice, go ahead.
Hi, I went ahead and lowered my hand so I wouldn't accidentally leave it up. I just wanted to thank you for welcoming me today. It was really great to hear about all the work that is going on. In particular, well, there was many things, but in particular, Abraham's report on what communities and service providers are experiencing was very helpful. Hard to hear, but very helpful in understanding like the impacts of COVID and everything that's going on, and how, ultimately how that impacts youth. So thank you again, and look forward to hearing more about the continuing good work.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. Any other comments, questions, reflections?
Hey, Thabiti, Adrian, I am going to put you on the spot. I think I heard or saw, maybe I saw an email that said there was an event or a Juneteenth piece that you're involved in. So I don't know, it just feels like if that's an upcoming, I'm gonna totally butcher this, I know. Is it, no, it's not, it's the following week, the 20th, if I'm not mistaken, is a Juneteenth observed holiday, but there's something you're involved in, Adrian. And if you're still in here, we'd love to hear about it, just because we have a little extra time. Oh, maybe Adrian's not there. Or maybe she's talking and she's muted.
Yes. Okay, well.
All right. Maybe we'll get it shared or forwarded to the council.
Okay.
Because I saw something that she shared with Anya in it, and maybe I'll say it out loud because I could on her behalf I can say that there's a nonprofit filmmaker in Portland that's a friend of Adrian's who's sharing the untold stories of marginalized and oppressed people. He's creating a video as an homage to Juneteenth, and there's a dancer, and the voice in this video homage, that's the voiceover, is being done by our own Adrian Livingston, YDC member, and it's going to be released on Juneteenth, which is celebrated on June 20th. And so more to come, but interesting information that we'll send out via email to the council.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well, I know that people probably don't want to depart from one another this morning, but I think we've come to the end of our business today, and I would like to move to adjourn our meeting today, if I've done that correctly. Okay, all right. So have a wonderful rest of your week, and I think our next meeting is December 8th, so we'll see you then.
It's September 8th.
I mean September, I'm sorry, whoa, I'm so sorry. September 8th and December 8th, but September 8th.
That's right.
It's the next meeting. September 8th.
Thanks, Saviti. Thanks, everybody.
Oh my God, okay.
Thanks,
all right, bye-bye.
bye-bye.